a duke most desirable. Chapter 1. The season promised to be a lovely one. Outside the window, Lydia could see flowers blooming and neatly trimmed trees swaying in the wind. The world invited her out, as if it had decided to throw a ball to rival the ones in town. Despite the lovely morning, Lydia felt neither excitement nor hope. In fact, she was ruminating on a melancholy reminder of days past. She would have continued to sit in silence if her mother had not interrupted. "Honestly, Diana, this dreadful atmosphere will give me indigestion." Lady St. Clair frowned and slid her teacup onto its saucer. "I do not understand your determination to stagnate." Diana sighed and took up her teacup. "I apologize, Mother. I do not mean to upset you." "You might have fooled me." Lady St. Clair raised an eyebrow, her eyes sharp as she pinned her daughter with a stony gaze. "There is no reason for your demeanour to be so horrible, especially not when you have taken it upon yourself." "I did not mean to become a spinster," Diana replied. She despised the word almost as much as the conversation she was currently having. It was so rude. No one had called her as much to her face, but Diana knew her reputation among social circles. Most questioned her lack of interest in being pursued. Other more unkind women speculated that she was a mistress. None of it was true, of course. Diana kept the truth to herself, like the petals of a flower she kept pressed in her diary. The flower had long since dried nearly to dust, but she still turned the pages to look at it. Lady St. Clair scoffed quietly. "Well, you certainly did not make much of an attempt to rectify your situation." "Mother, please, You were waiting." "I was," Diana insisted, a small seed of resentment blooming in her chest. "I was in love." She still was, or so she believed. She felt the same weight in her heart, though it had since become an ache dulled with time. "Love," Lady St. Clair muttered. She shook her head and pushed her teacup away. It was a wonder the contents did not spill. "I do not know where you developed this fascination with the concept." "You and Father love one another." Diana stared down at the table. She had heard this argument in her mind 100 times over. It never concluded positively. Lady St. Clair was unwavering. "Certainly, but you are sorely mistaken if you believe we were wildly in love when we were married." "Weren't you?" Diana challenged. "Mother, please, you knew one another for years. You even kept a book of letters he sent you." "I thought I had taught you better," Lady St. Clair said gravely, "but I see I am mistaken." Diana's hands curled in her skirts. She had hoped to sway her mother to her side, but the years had worn her thin. Diana's mother had entertained the concept of waiting for a year, but by the second she had doubted. Diana could not blame her mother. Even she had worried after the first year, after there were no letters and no word of a return date. "I am only speaking the truth," Diana said quietly. "Perhaps. Yet you fail to remember that my marriage was one of chance. It was luck that wed me to your father," Lady St. Clair said evenly. "Do not imagine that we eloped as the lower classes might, or that we stood against centuries of conduct to be together." Diana fell silent as she stared into the teacup before her. The contents were as murky as her heart felt. She could not untangle her thoughts about the love she had lost, or the pain she still felt. After so many years, she should have forgotten. 5 years apart was more time than she had known the man of her dreams, and she was acutely aware of the fact. "It is too late to argue about this," Diana finally said. "I pledged that I would wait, and I have." "It was a foolish thing to do," Lady St. Clair said quietly. "You knew nothing as you still do. There is time yet to find you a suitable husband." "Is there?" Diana shook her head and turned her teacup. The contents were likely cold already. "I do not think there are any men of my station willing to marry a woman of my age." You appear young yet. Lady St. Clair pursed her lips before standing, finished with the charade of breakfast. This is a discussion for another time. See to it that you do not pledge yourself to any other men while I attempt to save what is left of your reputation. Diana was silent as she watched her mother leave. Her tea was as cold as she thought it would be, and she abandoned it to stand by the window. If she looked closely, Diana could imagine she was young again. Just debuted, a flower in spring, her eyes drawn to a handsome young man with a pleasant smile. On the anniversary of his departure, nothing stung more than the memory. "Did you ever wish to return to me?" she asked the silent room. "Or was it all a lie?" Diana received no more answer than she had received to the countless prayers she'd uttered over the years. She drew away from the window, silent, and promised herself to forget. If she even could. Lord Arthur Hayat. For the first time in years, Arthur found himself on dry land, even as he stood in place. He imagined he could feel the ground shifting like the boards of a ship. He wondered if the world would ever stop rocking for him. Home again. Arthur could recognise the facade of his family estate. But the journey from the docks had been peppered with new shops and scenery he did not recognise. It felt good to be somewhere that had not changed. Arthur entered the hall of his family's home to silence. There was no great fanfare, but he could hear someone in the drawing room. They approached the door until suddenly he found himself facing his mother. "Arthur," she gasped, her eyes shining with joy and relief. "Oh, my son." Arthur carefully accepted his mother's hug. Her eyes were teary. "You are just as I remember you," he said kindly. "Certainly you are as gentle, mother. Do not weep. I am home." "Yes, but I have not seen you in years," she replied, a sigh escaping her. "Forgive your mother for her sentimentality. I have feared for you since you set foot on the dock." "There was no cause to fret," Arthur said patiently. "I am perfectly capable of looking after myself." "I have no doubt." Lady Hayat shook her head. "But that is quite enough. I am sure you would like to sit." Arthur followed his mother into the drawing room. He felt as if at any moment the walls around him would change, and he would be left standing in a house he did not recognise. There was only one conspicuous absence that stirred Arthur's suspicion. He kept his questions to himself until he was seated with his mother in the drawing room, the curtains drawn to let the light in. "Where is father?" Arthur paused, considering his words. "I did not expect he would meet me at the docks, but I assumed he would be here." Lady Hayat sighed. "He was called away on business early this morning. He meant to be home to greet you." "I understand," Arthur replied. Even as he spoke the words, he felt a twinge of despair. 5 years away from home had shown him how precious his family was. "He really did want to be here," Lady Hayat said quietly. "I only hope he returns soon." Arthur did not have to formulate a proper reply. The distant sound of the door opening and words being exchanged caught Arthur's attention. He recognised the sound of his father's shoes approaching, and Arthur nearly felt like a child again. The footsteps stopped in the doorway. Arthur stood to greet his father, a sense of peace flooding him as he saw the man. It was as if the world was perfectly righted. "There he is," Lord Hayat abruptly entered. He extended a hand to his son once he was close enough, his grip firm on Arthur's arm. "My son." "Father." Arthur smiled. "I have returned. I hope that in my absence I have honoured the family name." "I believe that you have done your utmost to do so," Lord Hayat replied. He was a quiet man with a worn and grey countenance, but there was wisdom and strength in his gaze. A sense of disquiet washed over Arthur. He could see more lines on his father's face than he remembered, and he was keenly aware of how much time had passed and how much his parents had aged. All around Arthur were reminders of the passage of time. The world had continued without him, and he had come back to find it changed. "There are matters we must speak of," Lord Hayat said. "Matters of business and marriage." Arthur froze, his hands suspended halfway through the air. Marriage? Of course. Lord Hayat sighed and moved to the nearby window, examining the scenery. "It is only natural. Your departure was unfortunately abrupt, but there is still time." "I appreciate that." Arthur fished for words. He was at a loss, his father's sudden declaration ringing in his ears. "Is that of the utmost importance at this time?" "Of course," Lord Hayat said calmly. "You are a bachelor entering the later years of your marriageable life. It would be wise for you to do this now." "We would have seen you married before you left," Lady Hayat admitted, "but there was not enough time." It was the first that Arthur had heard of any intentions toward marriage. He could not think of anything fitting to say to his parents. Of course, Arthur's thoughts turned to the woman he had left behind, the sweetheart whose rosy countenance he had thought of when he was away. He would close his eyes and remember her lovely dark hair and soft blue eyes. The way she had blushed when she turned her gaze from his face. "I'm not averse to it," Arthur finally admitted, "though perhaps we may speak of this once I have rested." "Of course," Lady Hayat gasped, suddenly approaching her husband to place a cautioning hand on his arm. "It must have been such a journey for you. Your room has been made up, of course." "Thank you." Arthur nearly sighed in relief. He had only been home for a few hours, but he felt more exhausted than he had felt in some months when he was away. Lord Hayat nodded shortly. "We will speak later, then. There is much to arrange." "Of course." Arthur hesitated, unsure of whether he should say more. He wanted to explain his hesitancy to marry, but it would require admitting the love he still remembered from before he had left. Arthur did not think either of his parents expected that he would have held to the same woman he had left behind. They likely thought it had been a childish romance, or one lacking true substance and devotion. Lady Hayat smiled reassuringly. "You should rest now. There will be plenty of time to speak later, and I would like you to escort me out in 2 days' time." "Yes, I would like that very much," Arthur replied. He would have time to speak with his mother then, and perhaps she would have the information he sought about his former sweetheart. "Good." Lady Hayat took Arthur's hands in hers. "Rest. In the morning we will have breakfast and speak about the future." The future was uncertain, but Arthur did not say as much. He simply smiled and bid his parents farewell before he left the drawing room, the exhaustion of his journey weighing suddenly on his shoulders. Arthur wondered if his books were still in order, and if there was still a flower pressed into the pages of his favourite book. He hoped it was true, but he was too tired to check when he reached his room. He resolved to look in the morning, and then he lay down and closed his eyes, surrendering to the sweet silence of sleep. Chapter 1. The season promised to be a lovely one. Outside the window, Lydia could see flowers blooming and neatly trimmed trees swaying in the wind. The world invited her out, as if it had decided to throw a ball to rival the ones in town. Despite the lovely morning, Lydia felt neither excitement nor hope. In fact, she was ruminating on a melancholy reminder of days past. She would have continued to sit in silence if her mother had not interrupted. "Honestly, Diana, this dreadful atmosphere will give me indigestion." Lady St. Clair frowned and slid her teacup onto its saucer. "I do not understand your determination to stagnate." Diana sighed and took up her teacup. "I apologize, Mother. I do not mean to upset you." "You might have fooled me." Lady St. Clair raised an eyebrow, her eyes sharp as she pinned her daughter with a stony gaze. "There is no reason for your demeanour to be so horrible, especially not when you have taken it upon yourself." "I did not mean to become a spinster," Diana replied. She despised the word almost as much as the conversation she was currently having. It was so rude. No one had called her as much to her face, but Diana knew her reputation among social circles. Most questioned her lack of interest in being pursued. Other more unkind women speculated that she was a mistress. None of it was true, of course. Diana kept the truth to herself, like the petals of a flower she kept pressed in her diary. The flower had long since dried nearly to dust, but she still turned the pages to look at it. Lady St. Clair scoffed quietly. "Well, you certainly did not make much of an attempt to rectify your situation." "Mother, please, You were waiting." "I was," Diana insisted, a small seed of resentment blooming in her chest. "I was in love." She still was, or so she believed. She felt the same weight in her heart, though it had since become an ache dulled with time. "Love," Lady St. Clair muttered. She shook her head and pushed her teacup away. It was a wonder the contents did not spill. "I do not know where you developed this fascination with the concept. You and Father love one another." Diana stared down at the table. She had heard this argument in her mind 100 times over. It never concluded positively. Lady St. Clair was unwavering. "Certainly, but you are sorely mistaken if you believe we were wildly in love when we were married." "Weren't you?" Diana challenged. "Mother, please, you knew one another for years. You even kept a book of letters he sent you." "I thought I had taught you better," Lady St. Clair said gravely, "but I see I am mistaken." Diana's hands curled in her skirts. She had hoped to sway her mother to her side, but the years had worn her thin. Diana's mother had entertained the concept of waiting for a year, but by the second she had doubted. Diana could not blame her mother. Even she had worried after the first year, after there were no letters and no word of a return date. "I am only speaking the truth," Diana said quietly. "Perhaps. Yet you fail to remember that my marriage was one of chance. It was luck that wed me to your father," Lady St. Clair said evenly. "Do not imagine that we eloped as the lower classes might, or that we stood against centuries of conduct to be together." Diana fell silent as she stared into the teacup before her. The contents were as murky as her heart felt. She could not untangle her thoughts about the love she had lost, or the pain she still felt. After so many years, she should have forgotten. 5 years apart was more time than she had known the man of her dreams, and she was acutely aware of the fact. "It is too late to argue about this," Diana finally said. "I pledged that I would wait, and I have." "It was a foolish thing to do," Lady St. Clair said quietly. "You knew nothing as you still do. There is time yet to find you a suitable husband." "Is there?" Diana shook her head and turned her teacup. The contents were likely cold already. "I do not think there are any men of my station willing to marry a woman of my age." "You appear young yet." Lady St. Clair pursed her lips before standing, finished with the charade of breakfast. "This is a discussion for another time. See to it that you do not pledge yourself to any other men while I attempt to save what is left of your reputation." Diana was silent as she watched her mother leave. Her tea was as cold as she thought it would be, and she abandoned it to stand by the window. If she looked closely, Diana could imagine she was young again. Just debuted, a flower in spring, her eyes drawn to a handsome young man with a pleasant smile. On the anniversary of his departure, nothing stung more than the memory. "Did you ever wish to return to me?" she asked the silent room. "Or was it all a lie?" Diana received no more answer than she had received to the countless prayers she'd uttered over the years. She drew away from the window, silent, and promised herself to forget. If she even could. Lord Arthur Hayat. For the first time in years, Arthur found himself on dry land, even as he stood in place. He imagined he could feel the ground shifting like the boards of a ship. He wondered if the world would ever stop rocking for him. home again. Arthur could recognise the facade of his family estate. But the journey from the docks had been peppered with new shops and scenery he did not recognise. It felt good to be somewhere that had not changed. Arthur entered the hall of his family's home to silence. There was no great fanfare, but he could hear someone in the drawing room. They approached the door until suddenly he found himself facing his mother. "Arthur," she gasped, her eyes shining with joy and relief. "Oh, my son." Arthur carefully accepted his mother's hug. Her eyes were teary. "You are just as I remember you," he said kindly. "Certainly you are as gentle, mother. Do not weep. I am home." "Yes, but I have not seen you in years," she replied, a sigh escaping her. "Forgive your mother for her sentimentality. I have feared for you since you set foot on the dock." "There was no cause to fret," Arthur said patiently. "I am perfectly capable of looking after myself." "I have no doubt." Lady Hayat shook her head. "But that is quite enough. I am sure you would like to sit." Arthur followed his mother into the drawing room. He felt as if at any moment the walls around him would change, and he would be left standing in a house he did not recognise. There was only one conspicuous absence that stirred Arthur's suspicion. He kept his questions to himself until he was seated with his mother in the drawing room, the curtains drawn to let the light in. "Where is father?" Arthur paused, considering his words. "I did not expect he would meet me at the docks, but I assumed he would be here." Lady Hayat sighed. "He was called away on business early this morning. He meant to be home to greet you." "I understand," Arthur replied. Even as he spoke the words, he felt a twinge of despair. 5 years away from home had shown him how precious his family was. "He really did want to be here," Lady Hayat said quietly. "I only hope he returns soon." Arthur did not have to formulate a proper reply. The distant sound of the door opening and words being exchanged caught Arthur's attention. He recognised the sound of his father's shoes approaching, and Arthur nearly felt like a child again. The footsteps stopped in the doorway. Arthur stood to greet his father, a sense of peace flooding him as he saw the man. It was as if the world was perfectly righted. "There he is," Lord Hayat abruptly entered. He extended a hand to his son once he was close enough, his grip firm on Arthur's arm. "My son." "Father." Arthur smiled. "I have returned. I hope that in my absence I have honoured the family name." "I believe that you have done your utmost to do so," Lord Hayat replied. He was a quiet man with a worn and grey countenance, but there was wisdom and strength in his gaze. A sense of disquiet washed over Arthur. He could see more lines on his father's face than he remembered, and he was keenly aware of how much time had passed and how much his parents had aged. All around Arthur were reminders of the passage of time. The world had continued without him, and he had come back to find it changed. "There are matters we must speak of," Lord Hayat said. "Matters of business and marriage." Arthur froze, his hands suspended halfway through the air. "Marriage? Of course." Lord Hayat sighed and moved to the nearby window, examining the scenery. "It is only natural. Your departure was unfortunately abrupt, but there is still time." "I appreciate that." Arthur fished for words. He was at a loss, his father's sudden declaration ringing in his ears. "Is that of the utmost importance at this time?" "Of course," Lord Hayat said calmly. "You are a bachelor entering the later years of your marriageable life. It would be wise for you to do this now." "We would have seen you married before you left," Lady Hayat admitted, "but there was not enough time." It was the first that Arthur had heard of any intentions toward marriage. He could not think of anything fitting to say to his parents. Of course, Arthur's thoughts turned to the woman he had left behind, the sweetheart whose rosy countenance he had thought of when he was away. He would close his eyes and remember her lovely dark hair and soft blue eyes. The way she had blushed when she turned her gaze from his face. "I'm not averse to it," Arthur finally admitted, "though perhaps we may speak of this once I have rested." "Of course," Lady Hayat gasped, suddenly approaching her husband to place a cautioning hand on his arm. "It must have been such a journey for you. Your room has been made up, of course." "Thank you." Arthur nearly sighed in relief. He had only been home for a few hours, but he felt more exhausted than he had felt in some months when he was away. Lord Hayat nodded shortly. "We will speak later, then. There is much to arrange." "Of course." Arthur hesitated, unsure of whether he should say more. He wanted to explain his hesitancy to marry, but it would require admitting the love he still remembered from before he had left. Arthur did not think either of his parents expected that he would have held to the same woman he had left behind. They likely thought it had been a childish romance, or one lacking true substance and devotion. Lady Hayat smiled reassuringly. "You should rest now. There will be plenty of time to speak later, and I would like you to escort me out in 2 days' time." "Yes, I would like that very much," Arthur replied. He would have time to speak with his mother then, and perhaps she would have the information he sought about his former sweetheart. "Good." Lady Hayat took Arthur's hands in hers. "Rest. In the morning we will have breakfast and speak about the future." The future was uncertain, but Arthur did not say as much. He simply smiled and bid his parents farewell before he left the drawing room, the exhaustion of his journey weighing suddenly on his shoulders. Arthur wondered if his books were still in order, and if there was still a flower pressed into the pages of his favourite book. He hoped it was true, but he was too tired to check when he reached his room. He resolved to look in the morning, and then he lay down and closed his eyes, surrendering to the sweet silence of sleep. Chapter 2. Once again, Diana found herself reminiscing on a beautiful morning. The flowers in the park were in bloom, and each one she saw reminded her of sweeter days. Diana was in the company of her good friend, Ellen Lilly. Miss Lilly was younger than Diana, but her maturity and resistance to rumour made her a wonderful friend. Miss Lilly was keen on listening, but she never participated in the gossip that went around women's circles. "So your mother has once again impressed upon you the importance of marriage?" Miss Lilly asked, her gloved hand twirling the parasol she held between them. Diana nearly sighed. It was exhausting just to think about conversations with her mother. "She did. It is a yearly occurrence. I'm not overly concerned." "You should be," Miss Lilly replied, surprised. "It has been so long, Diana." "You are of the same mind as her?" Diana asked, incredulous. "Perhaps you should be spending time with my mother rather than myself, then." Miss Lilly shook her head. "I mean, no disrespect, Diana. But you must know what your situation appears to be." "Perhaps I need to be reminded," Diana said stiffly. Miss Lilly sighed. "You are going to be a spinster for the remainder of your life if you do not find a suitable husband." Diana was quiet. She knew Miss Lilly spoke the truth, as harsh and undesirable as the truth was. Diana was not averse to spending her life alone, though the concept sounded less appealing as the years passed. Diana's situation was not one she had ever anticipated. She had assumed she would be married young, and she had prepared herself for the day it would happen. Never did Diana expect that she would be walking with a woman 3 years her junior who was engaged, while Diana was not. "I did not mean for this to happen," Diana said quietly. "I thought—" "I know," Miss Lilly said reassuringly. "Your great romance. How young were you?" 19. "It was more than a childish infatuation," Diana insisted. "He was an absolute gentleman, and I expected him to propose." Diana had told Miss Lilly about it in great detail, many times, The breathless joy of debuting, coupled with the appearance of a dashing suitor, had made Diana's 19th year a whirlwind. She had floated through the year in a haze of enchantment and excitement. The dream had not lasted. Diana's suitor had been called away to duty, and Diana was left to await his return. Despite the years of silence and no word of the man's return, she had not wavered yet. "I do not doubt the depths of your emotion," Miss Lily said patiently. She paused under the shade of a tree and allowed a couple to pass them. "Only your inexperience at the time. I am aware, but even when I have been introduced to other men at balls and parties, none have been quite like him," Diana explained. Miss Lily frowned. "You are comparing them to the ghost of a man you have harboured for years. Does that not seem unfair to you?" It was not a ghost, Diana wanted to explain. There were many exchanges she'd shared with her sweetheart, all proper and polite. She knew him, and she knew there was little hope of finding someone else who could rival him. "Perhaps," Diana finally admitted. "But I do not think I will ever find someone who could replace him." Miss Lily sighed. She took Diana's arm and drew them back toward the path. "I do not disagree. But all young love is bittersweet, and in most cases it ends." "I do not want it to end," Diana confessed. "Of course you do not." Miss Lily patted Diana's arm. "No one ever wishes it would end. But you will not be able to continue this way, Diana. You will never truly live if you continue to wait for this man." "I just wish he would send me a letter. Anything," Diana said, her heart twisting hopelessly. "Even if it were to tell me he has found a new life."
Thank you for watching. Before we continue into the story, do us a favor. Like this video and hit the subscribe button because it helps very much with YouTube's algorithm. Thank you again. Now back to our story.
Miss Lily was quiet for a long moment. Diana feared what her friend would say, but she had heard enough vicious rumours to strengthen her resolve. It was only now, on the anniversary of her first meeting with her sweetheart, that Diana felt things more keenly. Each whisper against her absent lover seemed crueler than it did any other time of year. "Have you considered that he might not be capable of answering?" Miss Lily finally asked. "I do not mean to upset you, but after so much time without word, I do not think of it." I could not. Diana had thought once what she might feel if she were told that her love had been taken from her, that he had crossed a threshold over which she could not follow. It was difficult enough to suffer the questions about his swift departure and silence, but it was worse to torment herself with dark imaginings of what could have happened to him. "I am sorry," Miss Lily said quickly. "I should not have said anything." "It is nothing I have not been told before," Diana replied wearily. "I have thought as much in my darker moments." Miss Lily nervously twirled her parasol. "Really, though," she began hesitantly, "I do not wish to upset you further, but I am worried for you." "Whatever for?" "I am content," Diana declared. The words were bitter on her tongue. "I have all that I need to be secure in life. My parents love me, and I have you as a friend." "Oh, Diana, you are not truly living," Miss Lily insisted. "I know you are a wonderful, lovely woman. You would be such a beautiful wife." Diana often wondered what her life would have been like if she had married her sweetheart, if he had not been called away just as she imagined he was going to propose. Thoughts about an unlived life only served to cause Diana more pain. She knew she would forever compare her dreams to reality. "I have avoided marriage because I do not wish to cause undue pain," Diana finally admitted, hushed. "I would not be an unworthy wife." "How on earth could you be?" Miss Lily cried. "I would always think of how each moment could have happened with another man," Diana explained. "I could not honour my husband when my thoughts would constantly turn to a man who holds my heart and memories." Miss Lily sighed. I cannot decide whether you are honourable or foolish, Diana. Then settle for honourable, Diana said, laughing tiredly. I have been called foolish enough by my mother. Over the years, Diana had learned well just how foolish her fervent dedication to a lover long lost was. After 2 years of awaiting his return, she had discovered just how much she had hurt herself with the promise. Even despite her recognition of the truth, Diana could not bring herself to give up the man of her dreams. Too many sweet words had been exchanged between them, and her heart was too intertwined with his memory. Perhaps we can find a way to remedy the situation, Miss Lily mused, patting Diana's arm reassuringly. You do not have to marry immediately, but perhaps there is a man quite like yours who will help sway your heart. I'm not sure how well that would work, Diana replied sceptically. My mother tried well enough to introduce me to suitable young men years ago. Well, she is your mother, Miss Lily said delicately. I am your friend. I would hope I have a more well-rounded idea of what inquiries to make. Diana laughed. Despite the sombre note their walk had begun on, Miss Lily had turned the morning around. As always, Diana was immensely grateful for Miss Lily's counsel. As serious as Miss Lily was, she had enough cheer to turn things around. Perhaps Miss Lily was right. Diana was reluctant to loosen her grip on the sweet memories of her youth, but time had taken a toll on her constitution, even if she never found a man worthy of taking her lover's place. At least she could try. I will try to enter the arena with dignity, Diana said. It has been some time, and I am aware just how my charms have been worn away. Nonsense, Miss Lily replied calculatedly. You do not look much older than myself, and your countenance is just as bright as ever. Well, that is a relief. Diana shook her head. Though I think it is known well enough just what age I am. Plenty of sisters and mothers will warn their dear brothers and sons. Miss Lily waved a hand dismissively. Then it is their loss. Besides, a man of your calibre will not be so concerned with such details. Then it seems your task is that much more difficult indeed, Diana said, raising an eyebrow at her friend. Are you quite sure you wish to accept this challenge, Miss Lily? I would not wish it upon anyone. Miss Lily laughed. The sound was bright like bells, and Diana had envied it at one time. The jealousy had faded quickly, as Miss Lily was a devoted friend and an engaged woman. You do not give yourself enough credit, Miss Lily said quietly. I know you can move on with your life, Diana. You only need the courage to take the first step. Diana was humbled by her friend's confidence in her, but she was almost equally uncertain of its truth. Diana was assuredly stubborn, as her mother often complained, but she was reluctant to take a step away from her past. Accepting her lover's absence and pursuing happiness was something Diana would have to work for. She could not waver based on dreamy wishes for a life long past. I feel that I can face this task, with your support, Diana finally said. I do not think I have ever thanked you enough, Miss Lily. I am certain you have, Miss Lily said kindly, and a good friend requires no thanks. Although perhaps you will remember me when you marry an astonishingly wealthy man who finds your maturity compelling. Diana laughed. She doubted her prospects were good, but at least she could count on avoiding the rakes and uncouth young men who would have pursued her when she had first stepped into the tun. As Diana approached the entrance to the park with Miss Lily, she caught sight of a carriage nearby. It clearly held someone of importance, though Diana did not immediately recognise the crest. She paused at the gate to the park, curious. Miss Lily followed Diana's gaze. Oh my! I wonder who has come to grace the park with their presence. She giggled quietly. Perhaps it is a visiting prince here to sweep you away. Diana was only half listening. She watched a woman step out of the carriage, her proud countenance obscured in part by her carefully arranged hair. The man who stood on the sidewalk beside her retracted his hand to close the carriage door. As the man turned, Diana saw his face. Her heart thumped painfully and her mouth opened in a wordless cry. She felt 19 again, a wide-eyed young woman enraptured by a gallant young man. He had the same statuesque features and the same golden, blonder hair, though there was a faint dusting of Stupley along his jaw. The sun had freckled his cheeks, and he looked stronger than Diana remembered, but it was him. It was Arthur, the man she had fallen in love with. Chapter 3. Despite his recent return, it seemed that Lady Hayat had no intentions of allowing Arthur a moment's rest. Arthur did not begrudge his mother her excitement, but he found it tiring to accompany her on simple errands given his recent travel. Thankfully, Lady Hayat decided to begin Wednesday with a visit to one of her acquaintances. She insisted on Arthur's presence, possibly as a means to introduce him to the man of the house. Lady Hayat was thus suitably cheerful as she sat across from Arthur in the family's carriage. "It's been some time since you have seen the Edges," she said. "I believe the last time was at a ball just before you left." It was. Arthur did not explain that he remembered because he had seen his sweetheart at the ball. His parents were not entirely aware of the courtship. Arthur had been nothing but proper with Diana, but they had been introduced through relatives. They had met so many times during the course of 1 year that Arthur had believed it divine intervention. His intention had been to marry Diana, but that had never come to pass. Arthur had left home, desperately wishing he could have married Diana first, and his passing thoughts had been occupied by her ever since. "I hope you will not be so silent during the visit," Lady Hayat said cheerfully. Her humorous remark was softened by the concern in her expression. "Are you quite all right?" "Yes, of course. I'm sorry to worry you." Arthur attempted a smile. "I was only thinking of the ball. It seems as if it was a lifetime ago." "It practically was," Lady Hayat murmured. "You were not quite the man that you are now." Time had changed much. Arthur wished he could find a way back to what he had left behind, but he had no clue where to start. He had Diana's last name, but he was unsure how to make inquiries. Even worse, there was a lingering fear that Diana might have been married while Arthur was away. The thought gnawed at him as the carriage came to a halt, rocking softly. As Arthur looked out the window, he caught a glimpse of 2 women exiting the park. He imagined he recognized one of them, but at such a distance he knew it was just his wishful mind. Arthur disembarked carefully and offered his hand to his mother. "I do hope it is all right that I have brought you along," Lady Hayat fretted. "It was such a sudden change that I worried it would be rude to request an invitation." "I'm sure it is not an issue," Arthur said patiently. He shut the carriage door behind his mother, still thinking about how he could find Diana. "Besides, we are already here. If there are consequences, I will face them." Lady Hayat laughed. She took her son's arm and followed him up the steps toward the house before them. "Are you certain? It has been some time since you have been among the civilized. I do hope your manners have not suffered from being away." "They have not. You taught me well," Arthur reassured her. He smiled and rang the bell at the front door. It was opened for him moments later, and he announced his mother. Arthur followed his mother as they were shown into the proper room, where a woman was already waiting. There was a younger woman with her also, her hands folded politely in her lap. It only took a moment for Arthur to realize the situation. He nearly said something to his mother, but he held his tongue at the last moment. The situation was clearly meant to introduce him to the young lady, and Arthur was absolutely not interested in entertaining her. "There you are, my dear friend," the woman in the room said. smiling as she rose from her seat. He belatedly recognised her as Mrs. Edge. "And this must be your son." "Arthur Hayat," he introduced himself, offering the proper bow. "It is a pleasure to meet you." "Charmed. I should not be surprised that you are a proper man," Mrs. Edge replied, tugging at her gloves. She appeared ready to leave. "Your mother speaks highly of you." "It is her good influence that contributed to my upbringing." Arthur submitted. Mrs. Edge laughed politely. "Charming and respectful to your mother? Well, you will have no trouble returning to society." Arthur politely inclined his head. He was acutely aware of Mrs. Edge's apparent intention to leave, and the indication worried him. He was not interested in being left alone with Mrs. Edge's daughter and his mother. "Well, shall we?" Lady Hayat suggested. "The park looked lovely when we arrived." "It always is this time of morning," Mrs. Edge replied. Arthur nearly spoke in protest. Miss Edge's eyes had noticeably widened, but he detected a hint of excitement in her startled expression. "Surely they will not leave us alone." "Come now, Arthur," Lady Hayat said suddenly. "I believe you would do well to offer Miss Edge assistance with her parasol." "Louisa." Mrs. Edge's tone was sharp when she addressed her daughter. The young woman stood carefully, her gaze flickering to Arthur for a moment. "Do pay attention. We are leaving now." "Yes, Mother." The last thing Arthur wanted was to walk in the park with a young woman he did not know, especially while his mother walked behind him to watch over the interaction. He would have preferred to stay at home. More than anything, Arthur wanted a moment alone to figure out how he was going to find Diana St. Clair. He glanced around the park gate as he approached it and wondered where the women he had seen before had gone. He wondered if the woman he had mistaken for Diana was perhaps a relative, and if he might find her and inquire after Diana. "The weather is certainly lovely." Miss Edge spoke softly, and Arthur guiltily turned his attention to her. "It is," Arthur agreed distractedly. He was unused to the expectation of making small talk, and he found himself lacking anything important to say. "I have not been here since I was a child." Miss Edge did not seem to mind the triviality of the conversation. "What a pity. The park is lovely in the summer." "It must be." Arthur escorted Miss Edge toward the first path he saw, already wondering how long his mother expected to stay. There was little to interest Arthur in the park. He had travelled enough to know what the world looked like. Now that he was home, his only interest was finding the love he had left behind. Arthur had never particularly cared to rush marriage. But when he had met Miss St. Clair, he had immediately changed his mind. She had been keen, vibrant, and lovely. The flower he had secretly given her at a garden party had been the greatest symbol of his love. "I suppose you must be thrilled to return home," Miss Edge ventured. "Very much so." Arthur looked away for a moment, a passing figure catching his eye. Once he turned, he knew it was not Diana. The disappointment he felt was stinging. Miss Edge persisted. "My mother tells me we must have met. Many years ago. A ball, I think she said it was." "Yes, I believe so." Suddenly a thought came to mind. Arthur schooled his voice and carefully explained. "I seem to remember being introduced by a friend at some point to someone, a Miss St. Clair, I believe." "Oh," Miss Edge did not seem interested by the confession. "What an odd thing to remember." "It was a unique name," Arthur replied. "I do not suppose you happen to know her." "I am afraid not." Miss Edge did not seem particularly bothered by her lack of knowledge. Arthur had not hoped for much, but the disappointment was still tiring. He supposed it could not be so simple to find his way back to the woman he had loved so deeply. The flowers that lined the park's pathway only served to remind Arthur of the ball. when he had promised Diana that he held only the most honourable intentions. He had planned to speak to his parents that night about marrying her, but his plans were lost. "Well, the past is gone," Miss Edge said suddenly. "You have a fantastic opportunity to create a new life, do you not?" Perhaps. Arthur did not explain that he could not start anew yet. Not without trying to discover whether the woman he had left behind was still waiting for him. For a moment, Arthur thought he noticed disappointment and impatience in Miss Edge's countenance. He dismissed it as his own. He was, after all, more interested in pursuing his desires than escorting a woman he did not know through a park. It was unfair to Miss Edge, he knew. Yet Arthur desperately wanted to excuse himself in favour of finding the elusive Miss Diana St. Clair. He worried that every passing moment was another that would convince her he was a rake and a liar if she did not believe so already. "I believe it would be nice to return to the night of the ball," Miss Edge said primly. "Perhaps then I could make a better impression." "I am sure you did," Arthur said quickly. "My pursuits for the past 5 years have left little time for fond reflection. I have forgotten much." "Though not an odd last name," Miss Edge remarked. She was more forward than Arthur expected, and he wondered if it was simply his experience that coloured his reaction. Arthur shook his head. "It will take some acclimation to fit into the place I occupied before." "You will have no issue, I think. My estimation is that you are a true gentleman," Miss Edge said confidently. Arthur was unsure what to say. He felt as if he were out of his depth. Nothing about the exchange was like the words he had shared with Miss St. Clair. He settled for a simple, "I am honoured." Whether Miss Edge was disappointed or not was a mystery, but Arthur did not mind. He was reminded again of how captivating Miss St. Clair had been, how her attention had seemed warm and pure. Arthur had never believed in true love, as some of his cousins had giggled about when they were children. He had not believed until he met Miss St. Clair, whose beauty and grace had so utterly charmed him that he found it impossible to forget her. Perhaps this was an inopportune occasion for a meeting, Miss Edge said, suddenly slowing to a halt. Arthur frowned as he matched Miss Edge's pace. "Miss Edge?" "Lord Hayat, I appreciate that you have humoured me this morning, but it seems to me that you would rather be elsewhere or retiring to your quarters." "Well, it was not my intention to be rude," Arthur replied, uncertain. He did not think he had said anything to the effect, but perhaps he had made a misstep along the way. Miss Edge smiled carefully. "I understand. You must still be exhausted from your journey home. I hope that we might meet another time when you are perhaps recovered and attentive." Arthur was shocked by Miss Edge's remark. He could not look to his mother or Mrs. Edge for direction in this setting. They were a few steps away and made no move to join the conversation. Arthur was certain he had not been rude, but Miss Edge was clear with her declaration. "Then I suppose we will meet again," Arthur finally said. "I wish you the best, Miss Edge." "And you as well," Miss Edge said, tipping her head gently. "We should return to the house now." "Of course." Arthur led the way back toward the house, unease settling in his chest. If he could not carry a simple conversation with a young woman, he feared he would be entirely undesirable to Miss St. Clair if he could even find her again. Arthur silently determined that he would do his utmost to prepare himself for meeting Miss St. Clair again. He would find her no matter the obstacles, and he would prove he had never forgotten her, not for a single day. Chapter 4. A day had passed since Diana had seen Arthur. She could not turn her mind from the thought of him standing before her, close enough that he might have answered if she had called his name. Miss Lily's insistence that Diana should move on was a suggestion that Diana could not believe in any longer. The pain of seeing Arthur again was too much. "We are expecting guests," Lady St. Clair said, her tone severe. "Where is your mind this morning?" Diana looked up from the book she held in her lap. She had not read any of it since sitting down. Her mind was far too occupied by other things to allow her to concentrate. "Yes, Mother." Diana closed her book and slid it onto the table before her. She was in no mood to receive guests, but she had little choice. Lady St. Clair frowned. "Whatever is the matter with you? You have been even more melancholy the past few days." "Nothing," Diana said quickly. The last thing she wanted was another lecture from her mother about her foolishness. "It is simply the heat." "Well, I hope you find it in yourself to be pleasant," Lady St. Clair said. "Our guests should be impressed. Besides, their son is accompanying them." "Yes, Mother." It was easier for Diana to agree. As much as she wished she could change the truth, it seemed that time had proven Diana's mother right. There was no hope. Diana could not believe that she had seen Arthur. She had lost sleep attempting to convince herself that it had not been him. Yet Diana knew Arthur's face well, and she was crushed by the realization that he had returned without speaking to her. She wondered how long he had been back, and if he ever planned to speak to her. "This will be good for you," Lady St. Clair announced, her expression pleased as she surveyed the room. "Perhaps polite company will remind you of the benefits of society and marriage." "I have no quarrel with either," Diana replied. "Quite the opposite." "You have not made much of an effort to pursue either in the last few years," Lady St. Clair reminded Diana. She sighed and suddenly sank into a nearby chair, weary. Diana had been prepared to leave, but the abrupt change in her mother's mood gave her pause. "Mother?" "I only wanted the best for you," Lady St. Clair said quietly. "I hope you understand. I always tried to present you to the highest company at the most refined parties." "Oh, Mother!" Diana crossed the room and sat by her mother. "I'm sorry if it seems that I have been ungrateful. I never meant to be wasteful of the opportunity you have given me." Lady St. Clair smiled tiredly. Her eyes shone with unshed tears, some distant emotion lingering at the memory of Diana's younger years. "You are my lovely daughter, and I hope that I may see you happy someday." "I am happy," Diana replied. She knew it was selfish to pine after her lost lover for much longer, especially after her recent discovery. "If I have not accepted my station with grace, I will make an effort to do so in the future." Perhaps the sweetness of love had escaped Diana. She wished she could recapture the glowing days of her youth and the fervent dedication with which Arthur had pursued her. 5 years since the romance had begun, Diana was now well aware that she had been foolish. How many other young women had been taken in by a dashing young man, only to be left weeping when their lovers never returned to them? "As I said, our guests include a very honourable man," Lady St. Clair said. She carefully took Diana's hands in her own. "Perhaps you will find his company agreeable." Perhaps. Diana did not wish to commit herself to a strange man she had never met, but she knew there were few options left to her. Lady St. Clair smiled reassuringly. "You need not throw yourself at his feet. I only ask that you give marriage another chance. There may be a man for you yet." "You are right." Diana smiled, but it felt tight on her lips. Strained like her heart and the fractured love she still felt. "I will not complain any longer. I'm looking forward to guests at any rate. It has been too long since we have had any." "You are precisely right." Lady St. Clair rose, content with Diana's promises. She gathered herself as the sounds of an arrival echoed in the foyer. Diana rose as her mother approached the doorway to greet their guests. Her father was with them, his voice sonorous in the hall. Diana did not hold high hopes for the meeting, but for her mother's sake, she was determined to make the best of the situation. All thoughts of conduct and polite conversation disappeared as Diana watched the guests enter the drawing room. Even her father's voice drifted away as she watched a man and woman enter, a younger man following behind them. "My daughter," Lord St. Clair said. Diana came to her senses quickly enough to enact a polite curtsy and reply, but she could not remember what she had said once the moment passed. Her eyes were on the man before her, Arthur Hayat stood in the drawing room just as Diana had seen him one day ago. His golden hair was perfectly set, and he had the strong jaw and regal nose that had made Diana swoon when she had first met him. Aside from his handsome visage, there was something in Arthur Hayat's piercing grey eyes. There was an intensity to his gaze, even when he only met Diana's gaze for a fraction of a moment. The simple exchange was enough to set Diana's heart pounding in her chest. "Enchanted," Arthur said, and Diana nearly shook at the sound of his voice. The memories of his smile and kind words at the parties they had attended came back to her at once. Standing before Arthur Hayat, Diana knew she could not forget him. Even despite all her fears about his lack of communication over the years he had been gone, Diana could not stand against the aching of her heart. Lord Arthur Hayat. Arthur could not believe it was her. He was caught up in sudden memories of Miss St. Clair's lovely smile and the sweetness of her attention. She was like a butterfly preserved in amber to him, something beautiful that remained from his life before he had left. It was almost deceptively wonderful. Arthur harboured the steadying fear that perhaps Diana was now married or even engaged. He could not simply believe that things would be so perfect that they would meet again this way. "Do come in," Lady St. Clair said. Arthur followed his parents into the room, though his gaze never left Diana. He wished he could speak to her directly, and he wished even more that he could call her by her first name. He remembered the moment he had learned it. "I hear that you are recently returned," Lord St. Clair said. Arthur could not remember if the man had spoken any words previously. He had been too occupied with thoughts of his past. "I am," he replied quickly. "It is time I upheld my responsibilities." "Of course," Lord St. Clair agreed. "A distinguished man such as yourself will likely have no difficulty returning to the Tone. You have done a great service already." "I have done my duty," Arthur replied honestly, as any honourable man should. "Of course," Diana said. Arthur nearly fell from his chair to turn and look at her, but he managed to maintain his composure. "Honourable men are very rare, but they are certainly impressive." Arthur paused a moment. He was unsure whether to receive the remark as a compliment or a veiled insult. He knew that she likely had many questions for him, and he wished he could speak to her privately about such matters. "Well, I have heard much about you," Lady St. Clair announced. She smiled cautiously. "I remember you as a child, but it has been some time since our families have spoken." "Far too much time has passed," Arthur's mother agreed. "It is such a pity. I regret that we fell out of contact for such a time." "It truly is regrettable," Lady St. Clair said. Her gaze flicked to Arthur, a detail he did not miss. "We were childhood friends after all. It would have been lovely for our families to remain connected." Arthur was content to let the conversation shift. He was aware of the scrutiny he was under, but he risked another glance at Diana. It was nearly impossible to look away, but he needed a glimpse of her to sustain himself. Diana's beauty had not diminished in their time apart. She was just as radiant as ever, and Arthur longed to look upon her face for longer than a moment. Despite his excitement at seeing Diana once again, Arthur was worried by her lack of interest. She did not meet his eye, and she sat attentive to every word that was spoken. "The West Park is lovely this time of year," Lady St. Clair said. Arthur turned his attention to the speakers just in time to hear the snatch of conversation. Lady Hayat nodded politely. "I have visited recently. It is truly beautiful. I prefer it for morning walks." "It is certainly popular," Diana submitted. Arthur entered the conversation, hopeful that Diana would take the opportunity to speak with him indirectly. "It certainly is," he agreed, "though I much more often prefer the solitude of private gardens." "Do you?" Diana asked. "I would think that you have missed society." Of course, to a degree, Arthur replied. He was thrilled by Diana's reply, despite her formal conversation. But I've always admired gardens. In my time away, I often reminisced on a garden party I attended as a young man. Garden parties are very in season this year, Lady Hayat said. The conversation shifted, and Arthur regretted that the exchange had ended so quickly. He wanted to speak with Diana again, simply to hear her melodious voice. In his years away, he had nearly forgotten it. Arthur hoped that he had communicated his wish to speak with Diana privately. He feared that Diana thought him a rake. He knew too well that he had likely lost her confidence with his lack of communication, but he could not have helped his silence. The only thing Arthur desired most in the world was to prove himself to Diana again and win her heart. He had thought of nothing else in his fleeting moments of peace when he was abroad, and upon seeing her again, he had been reminded why he had pursued her. "I would certainly appreciate a visit," Lady Hayat said. Arthur immediately began to listen once again, hopeful of the invitation's purpose. Lady St. Clair smiled politely. "Of course. There is time after the Langford ball. It will be wonderful to visit with you again." Arthur quietly held hope for the visit. He wanted nothing more than to see Diana again, and he hoped she would speak to him. His sole purpose was to prove his love to her. Duty was the only thing left for Arthur now that he had returned. The thought of Diana accompanying him as his wife through these years of his life filled him with hope. He would see that she understood his honourable intentions, no matter the lengths he had to go to. Chapter 5. The ball was in full motion as Diana stood with Miss Lily, her gaze scanning the crowd. Her heart thudded in her chest and she held her breath, desperately searching for a sign of Arthur. Diana had given up any pretense of acting as if she did not care about Arthur's return. The feelings she remembered from when they had first met remained, and seeing Arthur again had only rekindled them. Diana could not hope to fight them. "I have not seen you so excited in some time," Miss Lily noted, her fan raised to cover her mouth. She leaned close as she added, "Though I do not fault you." "I did not think I would ever see him again," Diana confessed quietly. "I had given up hope entirely. The heartache I have experienced was complete." "That much was easy to see," Miss Lily replied. "It is incredible that he has returned to you. Even more incredible is that you did not realise he was a family friend." "We only ever met at parties," Diana defended herself, though she felt silly that she had missed such a vital detail. "And I was quite preoccupied when I met him." Miss Lily laughed. "I am sure you were. From your description, I believe he must be a prince." Diana did not answer. Her attention turned to the other side of the room, where Arthur had appeared. Her breath caught in her chest and she felt her cheeks flush. The second that Arthur's eyes met hers, Diana glanced away. Her pulse raced and she hoped it was not obvious how affected she was. "Is he looking this way?" "He is. I believe he is approaching," Miss Lily whispered conspiratorially. "I will enlist my cousin in this endeavour." Diana hardly paid attention to Miss Lily. She only had eyes for Arthur, in stolen glances as she pretended to survey the gathered crowd. Miss Lily's cousin arrived before Arthur, politely speaking to Miss Lily as Diana awaited Arthur. Finally, Arthur came to stand before Diana. Miss Lily's cousin stepped forward to introduce himself, and Diana waited breathlessly for the introduction to conclude. "Miss St. Clair," Arthur addressed Diana, his grey eyes intense. "It has been too long." Indeed. Diana was aware that Miss Lily was keeping her cousin occupied, giving Diana some semblance of privacy, as much as she was afforded as a single woman. "Have you only just arrived, Lord Hayat?" "I have. I regret not arriving sooner," Arthur added, his voice lowered. I would have made it a priority if I realized you would be in attendance." Diana's heart skipped. She lifted her fan to cover her mouth, lowering her eyes. "I am flattered, Lord Hayat, though I am sure you have many more compelling matters to attend to." "None so compelling as the beauty that stands before me," Arthur said. Diana could hardly believe his words. The gravity of his confession was potentially scandalous, and if anyone nearby had heard, Diana had no doubt the gossip would circulate by the end of the night. Despite the danger of their exchange, Diana was positively thrilled by Arthur's attention. She had forgotten the low baritone of his voice and the sweet words he so easily conjured. Diana wished she could hear even more. "I'm truly honoured." Diana glanced at Miss Lily, careful to ensure she was still occupied with her cousin. "There must be many here who would enjoy the pleasure of your company, given your extended absence." "Perhaps. I will not shirk my duty, but it would be a grave mistake not to greet you first," Arthur said in a low voice. "I could not neglect greeting you as soon as I learned you were in attendance." "Incredible praise indeed," Diana replied. Arthur's mere presence was like a dream, and his proclamations were just as unbelievable. At any moment, Diana expected to be rudely awakened. It could not be true that the man she loved would return to her, yet he stood before her now. Just at the moment she had given up, Arthur had returned, and he had not changed. The way Diana felt around Arthur had not changed either. It seemed even more impossible that Arthur had not turned away from her after 5 years. He could have pursued any woman, but he was interested in her. "It has been some time since I have attended an event such as this," Arthur admitted, "but I am glad that I did." "As am I," Diana admitted, nervous at the admission. "It has been quite some time for me as well. I fear I have done my mother a disservice." "I doubt that," Arthur replied immediately. "If I may be so bold, you do not strike me as a dishonourable woman, Miss St. Clair." "You seem so certain." Diana paused, her nerves affecting her as she considered his words. Does he believe I've waited for him, or is he simply being polite? "I am." Arthur's grey eyes seemed to pierce straight through Diana. She was nearly weak at his scrutiny. "There is no question in my mind that you are a woman of incredible distinction, Miss St. Clair." Diana could not formulate an answer in time. Arthur's mother approached, and Diana held her tongue, afraid that she had kept Arthur far too long. The last thing she wanted was to draw too much attention to herself or Arthur. "There you are, dear," Lady Hayat said. "Do forgive me, ladies." "Of course," Diana said, hoping her reply was neither too quick nor too suspicious. "Lovely to see you, Lady Hayat." "You as well, Miss St. Clair." Diana watched Arthur leave, her pulse still rapid. She wished she could follow him or steal a quiet moment alone. Those things would never happen, however, and Diana was left wondering when she would see Arthur again. Despite the boundaries between them, Diana hoped Arthur would see fit to properly pursue her once again. Her dreams of a perfect future might not have passed her by completely, she realised, and the thought gave her peace she had not known in some time. Lord Arthur Hayat. Arthur nearly turned to look over his shoulder at Diana. He had stopped short upon entering the room and seeing her standing at the far wall. Her beauty was immeasurable, and Arthur was filled with new resolve to secure her hand in marriage. The attraction that Arthur had recognised in his youth still flowered between them. Arthur could see it when Diana averted her eyes, and he could hear it in her replies. Unfortunately, the requirements of etiquette prevented Arthur from returning to Diana for the night. He followed his mother instead, wishing he could have spoken to Diana for just a few moments longer. "You remember, Miss Edge," Arthur's mother said. She had brought Arthur right to the young woman. Arthur knew well enough his mother's intentions. Despite the purity of her intentions, Arthur couldn't help but feel cheated. His thoughts were with Diana and the time he had lost with her in favour of a woman he hardly knew. "Yes, it's good to see you, Miss Edge." Arthur would not be impolite, despite his awkward position. Miss Edge smiled prettily, her eyes lowered as she bowed her shoulders. "Lord Hayat, it seems spirits are high this evening." "Certainly, though I have just arrived," Arthur said. "Then I'm honoured to speak with you first this evening." Miss Edge's smile widened. Arthur was aware that his mother was not the only one politely arranging these visits with Miss Edge. He was also keenly aware of Miss Edge's interest. The polite thing to do would be to confront his mother privately. However, Arthur recognised a forwardness in Miss Edge that seemed best addressed if it continued. He did not want to give her the wrong impression, especially since he had found Miss St. Clair once again. "Well, I have greeted a few others," Arthur explained politely. "Ah!" Miss Edge's smile hardened a little. She glanced away, and Arthur wondered if she was looking in Miss St. Clair's direction. "Then it is a pity I did not linger closer to the entrance." "I would not wish to take up your time," Arthur replied carefully. He did not want to say too much or embarrass Miss Edge. She was likely quite desirable to many other men in attendance, and Arthur did not doubt her charms. His interest was simply elsewhere. Miss Edge immediately shook her head. "It would never be a waste," she said firmly. "There are few gentlemen as valiant as you, my mother says. It is an honour for me." Arthur doubted that Miss Edge's mother had said anything quite so dramatic. He attempted a neutral smile before turning to his mother, hoping to make his way across the room once again. Perhaps it would not be so risky to approach Diana again. "Do excuse me," Arthur said, politely addressing Mrs. Edge first. "There are a few acquaintances in attendance that I should greet. I have been gone too long." "Of course," Mrs. Edge said pleasantly. "Enjoy your evening, Lord Hayat." Arthur carefully offered his arm to his mother before leading her away. Once they were a distance away from Mrs. Edge and her daughter, Arthur's mother spoke. "That was frightfully short," Lady Hayat said. "You did not insult the young lady, did you?" "Of course not," Arthur replied, shocked. "Why on earth would you assume so?" Lady Hayat sighed. "Oh, I do not think the worst of you, Arthur. You have simply been away so long, and I worry for your future." "I understand." Arthur carefully wove through the crowd toward his father, occasionally glancing toward Diana. "I promise I will do my best to honour the family." "I know you will," Lady Hayat said, surprised. "Arthur, are you attempting to rid yourself of me?" Arthur was so surprised he could not form an immediate answer. His mother laughed quietly, her gaze merry, as she left Arthur's side to join her husband. "Let him have his fun," Lord Hayat said good-naturedly. "I believe he has earned one night of freedom for his services." "Go then," Lady Hayat said cheerfully. "I will find you later in the evening." Arthur excused himself cautiously, unconvinced that his mother would give up so easily when it came to Miss Edge. Despite his reservations, however, he was determined to find Diana again. He had seen her lingering by the patio, and he hoped he could approach her. When Arthur finally made his way to the patio, he found Diana's mother engaged in conversation. He knew it was risky and potentially disastrous to approach Diana while her mother was present, but he could not help himself. "Lady St. Clair," Arthur greeted Diana's mother once he noted a lull in her conversation. "I hope you are enjoying the evening." "Yes, it is quite lovely," Lady St. Clair replied, inclining her head politely. "It is a pleasant surprise to see you once again." Arthur turned his attention to Diana. "Miss St. Clair," he greeted her, "it is a pleasure." Diana bowed her shoulders. "Lord Hayat." Arthur isn't Duke yet, so he should always be introduced as Lord Hayat. Lady St. Clair was distracted once again by her conversation partner. Arthur silently thanked God for what must have been divine intervention that momentarily drew Lady St. Clair's attention away from Arthur and Diana. "I could not have made my way to you sooner," Arthur said quietly. Diana's eyes widened at the confession. Arthur feared that perhaps he had gone too far, but suddenly Diana spoke. "I have awaited your return," she said, her voice trembling, "and I have been true in your absence." "I do not doubt it." Arthur glanced nervously at Lady St. Clair. "Tell me that you still wish for what I promised when I left." "What is it that you offer now?" Diana's reply was nearly a whisper. The uncertainty in her question was clear. She was unsure whether to trust him fully. "My intentions are honourable," Arthur replied confidently. "I would properly seek your hand in marriage, as I meant to do before duty called me away." Diana finally looked up at Arthur. Her bright blue eyes radiated a joy and relief that were staggering in power. "There is nothing more in this world that I desire." Lady St. Clair turned toward Arthur and Diana, her conversation abandoned in favour of listening in. Arthur stepped away carefully, content with the knowledge that Diana had remained steadfast in his absence. "Excuse me, Lady St. Clair. Miss St. Clair." Arthur politely excused himself, his thoughts already turning toward his promise and when he could next see Diana again. This time Arthur would not allow anything to come between himself and Diana. He would make certain of it. Chapter 6. The days seemed brighter since Diana had been reunited with Arthur. She looked out the window in Miss Lily's sitting room, her eyes drawn to the flowers that lined the property. They reminded Diana of her last meeting with Arthur before he had left, when he had presented her with a flower and promised that she was the only one for him. For the first time in some time, Diana had accepted her friend's invitation to a small gathering of ladies. The drawing room was awash with sunlight from the windows, and the conversation drifted in parts, as the women spoke about the latest fashions and polite gossip. "You are positively distracted," Miss Lily said. Diana came to her senses and cast her friend an apologetic smile. "Honestly, Diana, I cannot believe how transformed you are." "Well, it is a mysterious and consuming affliction," Diana replied carefully. "What is?" Diana leaned in conspiratorially. "Love, of course." Miss Lily's shocked expression nearly made Diana laugh. She held her joy in check, aware of the other women gathered in the room. She was not yet comfortable enough to announce her situation to anyone else. It was a risk to tell Miss Lily about it, but Diana knew her friend would never betray her. Miss Lily had been all too keen to listen to Diana's retelling of the ball, even if Diana had kept most of Arthur's declarations of love to herself. "Well, Lord Hayat has had such a positive effect on your mood that I cannot dispute it," Miss Lily replied. "I can hardly believe how romantic it all is. It was a frightful gamble to wait for him." "So I have been told," Diana said, amused. "But I knew when I met him that he was a proper gentleman, and I knew that there was a devotion between us that could not be broken. At the very least he has returned and set his sights on you," Miss Lily noted. She followed Diana's gaze toward the window, a thoughtful sigh escaping her lips. "You must have a spring wedding, Diana. It would be so beautiful." "It would," Diana agreed quietly. Although she claimed confidence, Diana had worried that Arthur had been lost to her for some time. She had expected to never see him again in her lifetime, and she had been prepared to resign herself to loneliness and heartache. Although Arthur had returned and Diana readily believed him, there was still a part of her that doubted. Diana's mother had spoken so many negative words through the past 5 years that Diana found it hard not to hear them when she had a spare moment. "I do hope he is prompt," Diana finally said. "I agree that propriety must be maintained, but I fear that waiting will only invite disaster." "Disaster? I am sure nothing will happen," Miss Lily replied, disturbed. She smoothed her skirts nervously. "Do not use such ominous language." "I'm sorry," Diana said, attempting a smile. "Do not listen to me. I am of a fretful disposition." "Well, you should take confidence in Lord Hayat's continued interest," Miss Lily replied sagely. Her expression was serious as she leaned closer. "You know, he could have run off with any woman when he was away. He could have set his sights on a much younger debutante as well." Miss Lily was absolutely right. Yet Diana feared that Arthur was still perfectly capable of leaving her if he happened to change his mind in the slightest. Diana was aware she was past her prime. She was not the best choice of the many ladies she knew. Despite her past with Arthur, she feared that he would meet another young woman who would capture his attention. After all, 5 years had passed since Arthur had met Diana. Perhaps he would find himself no longer the same man. "Well, you had best conduct yourself properly," Miss Lily said quietly. "I worry that you will dishonour yourself if you accept his advances too quickly." "I am not a young woman any more," Diana argued. "I believe I have earned a reputation for level-headedness." Even the most steadfast of ladies is susceptible. Miss Lily reached for her tea, an eyebrow arched in an unimpressed curve. "Yourself included." "I dare say the conversation here seems far more compelling than the other side of the room," a young woman said suddenly. Diana looked up to see the newcomer, whose small hands daintily spread her skirts flat as she took a seat across from Diana and Miss Lily. She appeared quite young, perhaps recently debuted. There was a keen sharpness to her gaze that betrayed a greater truth beyond her girlish curls and rosy lips. "Miss Edge," Miss Lily said, surprised, "I seem to remember that you were otherwise occupied today." "Ah, yes," Miss Edge sighed wistfully, her gaze turning toward the window. The effect was rather dramatic. "I am uncertain whether I should tell you, as it is all very proper." Miss Lily raised her eyebrows and slid her teacup onto the table. "By all means, we are not prone to gossip, Miss Edge. Your matters are safe." Diana had the distinct impression that Miss Edge was perhaps too interested in drama and attention. However, she did not begrudge the lady her cheerful intrigue. Miss Edge seemed harmless, and Diana was content to let her enjoy her youth. "Well, my parents have seen fit to arrange proper introductions to a suitor," Miss Edge confessed. The satisfaction in her smile was unfettered. "He is quite a distinguished man." "That is wonderful for you," Lady Lily said politely. Diana knew her friend had hoped for more drama, but Miss Edge appeared to have more to say. "I do hope so. We have met twice already. He is dashing and honourable." Miss Edge paused as if considering something, her hand covering her mouth in a nervous gesture. It seemed more rehearsed than reflexive. "It is a shock he was not married already, but I suppose his absence from town may account for that." "I can certainly understand that," Diana volunteered. The similarity between her position and Miss Edge's was surprising. "We must be steadfast. If his conduct is gentlemanly, I am sure there is no terrible issue that has caused the delay." "Of course," Miss Edge replied innocently. "I do not think he would ever truly act dishonourably. Though he is so kind, I do fear that others may take advantage of him." Diana smiled politely, but her thoughts had begun to wander. She imagined that Arthur would speak to his parents about her, perhaps after he called on her properly for the first time since he had visited with his parents. Arthur was an upstanding gentleman, but Diana knew his sense of duty came before anything else. If his parents did not believe Diana to be a good match, it was possible that Arthur would withdraw from his promise to wed her. Could I withstand losing him again? Diana feared another disappointment would break her heart beyond repair. If she could not find happiness with Arthur, there was nothing left for her but to finish her days in solitude. "I do not wish to pry," Miss Edge said politely, but I could not help but overhear the end of your previous conversation. Are you engaged in private matters as well? They would not be private if I told you, Diana reminded her. Miss Edge's smile wavered. Diana could not tell the truth behind it, but she suspected the young woman might have been insulted by the censure. Of course, I did not mean to be rude. You have not made a terrible misstep, Lady Lily reassured her starkly, though I do wish to hear more if Miss St. Clair is willing. Diana considered a polite refusal. After all, she did not know Miss Edge well. However, considering Miss Edge's interest in another man and her similar predicament, Diana felt somewhat comforted that her words would not leave the circle of their conversation. Well, as I was saying, I hope that his courtship is prompt. I do not wish to be indecent, but I fear that postponing any further will complicate matters, Diana explained. Miss Edge's eyes widened innocently. How so? If he conducts himself properly, there is no need to rush, is there? He has been away for some time, Diana said carefully. If he is pushed to accept another woman, I fear his sense of duty will turn him away. It would be incredible if your love could transgress the usual dictates of society, Miss Edge replied. She sighed, her eyes downcast. However, I agree that duty is paramount. If he must do his part by marrying another woman, there is nothing that can help it. That is not a comfort, Lady Lily exclaimed. No. She is correct, Diana said quietly. Despite her desire to believe otherwise, she knew it to be true. Besides, if he is honourable, he will do his duty, and I could not ask otherwise from him. It is not a dishonour to simply choose another woman, Lady Lily pointed out, waving a hand dismissively. That is a gentleman's prerogative. Now excuse me, I must call for more tea. Diana watched her friend retreat. Miss Edge's words had tempered her joy at having found Arthur once again, but she was determined to believe the best of her situation. Despite her fears, Diana would trust in Arthur. He was an honourable man, and she knew he would not act in a way that would damage either of their reputations. I believe Lady Lily does not entirely grasp the situation, Miss Edge ventured, but I absolutely do, Miss St. Clair. I do hope you can entrust your worries to me. Diana did not want to agree, but she felt it would be rude to dismiss the young woman. She settled for a polite smile as she replied, Yes. It seems we have similar circumstances. Miss Edge carefully folded her hands in her lap and leaned in closer. Her voice lowered. I do mean what I say, Miss St. Clair. Those of us who have experienced a true love may rely on one another. If there is ever anything you do not trust to tell anyone else, please remember that I am here. I will, Diana promised. Perhaps Diana was too suspicious of Miss Edge. She seemed like a proper young woman, despite her somewhat mischievous and dramatic demeanour. Besides, Diana knew she had been similarly inexperienced at the same age. It would be nice to have someone to confide in, Diana thought. She would give Miss Edge a chance, and perhaps it would serve them both well. Chapter 7. Arthur escorted his mother on her morning walk early Friday morning. His mind was elsewhere, and more than once he felt the pressure of his mother's hand on his arm, reminding him to pay attention to the others walking the same path. Arthur, you are quite distracted, Lady Hayat exclaimed. It is as if I am walking alone, or with a very small child. I apologise, Mother. Arthur patted her hand with his, tearing his eyes away from a nearby rosebush that had enticed him to indulge in his memories. I have much to think about. Whatever has occupied you so completely? Lady Hayat asked, concerned. You have only just returned, and I hardly recognise the man beside me. Matters of marriage and duty, Arthur replied cautiously. It is best spoken of in private. Perhaps when we return home. I should think so, Lady Hayat replied, disquieted. She hesitated before adding, I am pleased that you have turned your attention toward having a family of your own. Perhaps my efforts were not in vain. Arthur was aware his mother was probably speaking of Miss Edge. He hoped to cautiously explain his true intentions and perhaps bring up Diana's name. But before he could, Lady Hayat made a noise of shock. "Oh, what a lovely surprise," Lady Hayat announced. "I did not expect to see you, Lady St. Clair." Lady St. Clair stood before them, with Diana at her side. Arthur immediately moved to greet them, his heart soaring at the sight of Diana. "Lady St. Clair," he said. He turned to Diana next, wishing he could take her hand to kiss it. "Miss St. Clair, it is truly a pleasure." Diana's cheeks coloured as she turned her eyes downward, bowing politely. "Lord Hayat, once again, it seems we are in one another's company." "A clear intervention of Providence that I do not regret," Arthur replied. Lady Hayat laughed brightly. "It seems our families are intertwined, dear friend. I suppose it is a matter of course that we should meet before we have planned to do so formally again." "But of course," Lady St. Clair smiled. Her gaze flicked over Arthur, and he felt completely transparent. He wondered if she knew of his intentions, or if she was simply suspicious of his interest in Diana. Arthur did not listen as his mother spoke to her friend. He had eyes for Diana only, and she was a lovely flower in the sun. The light colour to her cheeks was rosy and delicate, and her blue eyes were as soft and bright as the morning sky. There was no way for Arthur to explain his desires. He wished he could return home immediately to pen Diana a letter in which he confessed everything, but he knew it would be a risk he could not take. He did not want Diana to be placed under scrutiny. "Have you acclimated to town once again, Lord Hayat?" Diana asked. Arthur was careful to reply after a moment of silence, hoping he did not seem overexcited. "I believe that I have, in large part thanks to the season. It is soon enough that I have been able to attend several functions to prepare myself." "It will certainly be one to remember," Diana said. She lowered her eyes politely. "The hosts this year are lucky to have gained a respectable man. The Lord and Lady Templeton will be hosting a garden party tomorrow," Lady Hayat noted. "Lord Templeton's son has also returned, I believe. It will be nice to visit family." "We will be certain to see you there," Lady St. Clair replied evenly. "We will have to meet again soon, Lady Hayat." "Certainly." Lady Hayat smiled as they began to part ways. "Have a lovely morning, Lady St. Clair." "You as well, Lady Hayat." Arthur was silent as he escorted his mother further down the path. He hung on every word Diana had said, despite the shortness of their exchange. He wished he could have offered to accompany her and her mother, yet he appreciated the opportunity he had been afforded. Despite the surprise of the unexpected meeting, Arthur believed he had conducted himself well. There was little he could do to pursue Diana at the moment. He turned his thoughts instead to extracting himself from the position his mother had neatly manoeuvred him into. "You spoke of your efforts before, Mother," Arthur began. Lady Hayat laughed quietly. "Yes, I'm sure you understand me." "If you're speaking of Miss Edge, yes," Arthur replied carefully. He was unsure of how to proceed. He had left home before he had experienced much of courtship. Arthur's only experience was with Diana, and their love had felt so natural and true that he had hardly thought about it. With Miss Edge, Arthur was keenly aware of the many ways in which he could make a grave mistake. Lady Hayat sighed. "Well, judging by your expression, I assume this will not be a pleasant conversation." "I am sorry, Mother," Arthur began. He wanted to explain his position, but his mother shook her head. "What for? You have conducted yourself well." "Perhaps, but I've been dishonest with you," Arthur said tentatively. Lady Hayat came to a halt at the side of the path. "Tell me if this will upset me, Arthur," I cannot faint in the middle of the park." "No, mother, no, I have not done anything untoward," Arthur said quickly. He was unhappy that his mother could even suspect as much, but he understood the impact he had on his family's name. "Good. Then be clear about your meaning, and do not be uselessly dramatic. I have an interest in a woman I knew in the days before I departed." Lady Hayat was silent. She gazed into the distance, her eyes unfocused. "In what way did you know this young lady?" "I never approached her without a chaperone, and our words were exchanged in public places," Arthur reassured his mother. "We met frequently at balls and parties, but I did not pursue her for fear of tarnishing her reputation." "You were wise to do so," Lady Hayat said quietly. Arthur did not pursue the subject. He was aware of how monumental the information must have seemed to his mother, and he allowed her time to consider it. Even if Arthur's parents agreed to his decision, it would take time and the proper conduct to pursue Diana. He did not wish to wait or make her wait, but he knew it was of utmost importance to court her in the most respectful manner. Even if he had already once spoken to her frankly, when she was all but unchaperoned. "Where then does your interest lie?" Lady Hayat finally asked. Arthur was unsure of himself. He did not know whether telling his mother Diana's name would help or hinder his cause. He decided he had few choices. "It rests with Miss St. Clair," Arthur confessed. Lady Hayat did not seem to understand at first. Her brow furrowed, and she turned to gaze down the path they had walked, as if she could still see Miss St. Clair standing there. "Are you certain?" Lady Hayat turned back to her son, her expression still puzzled. "I mean no disrespect to Miss St. Clair. I only mean that you have only just returned, and there are many young women that you might be interested in." "It is not sudden," Arthur defended. "As I have said, we were acquainted before I left. My conduct with her has been entirely proper, and I am simply interested in pursuing the matter further." "Well, I suppose it is not a proposal," Lady Hayat murmured. She was still preoccupied, her eyes turning again to the path. "There is no harm in supervised visits." "Precisely. I only thought it would be proper to explain to you so that Miss Edge does not have the wrong impression of me," Arthur said. He hoped his meaning was clear, and from the sudden realization on his mother's face he knew it was. Lady Hayat's expression was grave as she considered her son. "You understand, Miss St. Clair is not of the same debut season as Miss Edge." It was a polite way to remind Arthur of Diana's age. He expected as much, but he was still incensed to be reminded that Diana was technically not a young woman any longer. "I am no young man," Arthur replied confidently. "I have given it much thought, Mother. It is not improper to be of the same age. If anything, my experience has left me interested in someone that is of a certain maturity." "Well, I am sure I do not need all the details," Lady Hayat replied. Her eyes were narrowed as she appraised her son. "You are set on this course?" "I have always been." Arthur hesitated to reveal more, but he felt it necessary to prove his dedication. "In my years away, I considered my actions. I imagined whom I might pursue when I returned." Lady Hayat sighed. "That is romantic, Arthur. But you must understand the ramifications of your choices." "I do. Believe that I have considered this in detail, and it is not a whim I have followed for 5 years." At times Arthur had wondered whether he could forget Diana. He had told himself that he might meet an unfortunate fate while he was away, and he should not have held her in expectation for his return. No matter how often he attempted to forget Diana's face, however, Arthur could not drive her from his mind. Each flower he encountered during his travels reminded him of her, and every sweet note of music seemed to transport him to the ballrooms in which they had first become acquainted. I was of the impression you had a pleasant relationship with Miss Edge, Lady Hayat finally confessed. I expected that you meant to pursue her hand in marriage. Her family was certainly interested. I do not mean to turn away a proper young woman, Arthur said, but it is not fair to her, nor is it fair to Miss St. Clair for me to be disingenuous about where my heart lies. Lady Hayat sighed. Finally a smile graced her lips once again. You are a kind and wonderful son, she said. I believe your intentions are pure. It is only my experience that lends me hesitation. Arthur smiled. He had no misconceptions about his mother's hopes for him. She only wanted the best, and he had no doubts that she had arranged his introduction to Miss Edge as a way to ensure his happiness and future. There was no denying his truest desires, however. Arthur could not forget Diana, and he did not want to push her aside simply because of the passage of time. If anything, time had shown Arthur that Diana was the only woman that he would ever want or need. So long as she felt the same, he would act in such a way to honour her and make her his wife. I appreciate your help in this, Mother, Arthur finally said. I have waited to speak with you and Father about this matter, as I wanted to ensure that Miss St. Clair was not averse to revisiting the days that have long since passed. I will speak with your father, Lady Hayat submitted, though I cannot guarantee what he will say. The most I can do is speak to him frankly and ask that he understand. That is all that I ask of him, Arthur said patiently. This is a mistake that is mine to make, though I do not think it is one. You are awfully certain, Lady Hayat finally said, turning back toward the path before them. Let us see what your father says first. Then you may pursue Miss St. Clair until you have your answer. Chapter 8. The Lord and Lady Templeton were occupied by the time Diana arrived. The party guests were admiring the roses in the garden. There were delighted young women wandering arm in arm under the sun, their parasols opened like delicate blooms. Only one day had passed since Diana had last seen Arthur, but she already wanted nothing more than to speak with him again. She had heard nothing from him yet, and she was becoming nervous. Diana's mother spoke quietly. Come, Diana, we must greet our hosts. Yes, Mother. Diana turned her attention to the Lord and Lady Templeton, hoping she would find Arthur when she left their company. Lord St. Clair introduced his wife and Diana. Diana murmured a polite word and bowed formally. As lovely as the party was, she was more interested in the company of the man whose return she had awaited for years. My son, Lord Templeton said. Diana turned her attention to the conversation and the man who had suddenly appeared. The younger Lord Templeton appeared familiar. Diana had a fleeting memory of him, perhaps from when they were children. She seemed to remember that his given name was Brook, although she was uncertain. Honoured, Diana murmured. Likewise, Miss St. Clair. Lord Templeton glanced at his father, who had since engaged Diana's father in conversation. The Lady Templeton was speaking with Lady St. Clair, leaving Diana and Lord Templeton in one another's uncertain company. The garden is lovely, Diana submitted carefully. Lord Templeton smiled. Thank you for saying so. I apologise for keeping you from it. Oh, not at all, Diana replied quickly. It is no hindrance to make your acquaintance. I appreciate the sentiment, but please, you need not defer to flattery or undue politeness. It is uncomfortable to be presented to a stranger. Diana paused to consider Lord Templeton's words. He seemed unorthodox, although charming. He was not unattractive, although Diana was not charmed by him as she was by Arthur. Finally, Diana came up with a reply. You are too kind, but I do mean my words. The garden is truly lovely. Lord Templeton smiled. I am pleased to hear it then. I suppose you are used to the machinations of those attempting to do what is best for you. The remark was surprisingly forward, but Diana found it refreshing. There was a glib innocence to Lord Templeton's words. I am lucky to have family that desires the best for me. Of course. Lord Templeton gazed toward the garden. It is lovely here, but I sometimes find myself nostalgic for the college that I attend. You are a scholar, then? Diana asked, surprised. Yes. Lord Templeton seemed to light up with the admission. As a child, I dreamed that I might teach someday. Truly. It was a surprising confession. Scholars and society did not typically mix well, in part because most scholars were lacking in knowledge of the intricacies of etiquette. Lord Templeton nodded carefully. I am well aware of my shortcomings. It seems fitting to me that I should serve a purpose where I am best suited to do so. How very self-aware, Diana replied. I wish you the best in your endeavours, then. Before she could consider another topic of conversation, a figure in the distance caught Diana's eye. It was undoubtedly Arthur, and she nearly called his name when she realised his presence. She only barely restrained herself, though her heart began to beat faster in her chest. Lord Templeton followed Diana's gaze. Ah, my friend, Lord Hayat. It has been some time since I have seen him. You are acquainted? Diana asked, surprised. Of course. Lord Templeton smiled, a memory coming to his mind. We were childhood friends. It saddened me to see him leave. I am glad he has returned safely. Certainly, Diana murmured. She held her breath as she watched Arthur enter the garden, his golden head shining in the sun. Diana suddenly feared she was too obvious. Her gaze had lingered too long on Arthur. Perhaps an attentive lady had noticed and would relay the exchange to her friends. It would be simple for Diana to be found out from such a simple mistake. Arthur's silence did not help matters. Diana had expected him to call on her sooner, but he had not yet attempted to speak with her. She only hoped it was a simple matter of timing, as the season was nearly upon them and Arthur was likely expected to make appearances at a great many soirees. I would be happy to make an introduction, if you require one, Lord Templeton offered. Diana smiled, thankful. Lord Templeton was quite a gentleman despite his shortcomings concerning society. I appreciate the offer, Lord Templeton, but Lord Hayat and I have already been introduced. I see. Diana suspected that Lord Templeton had seen more than he would admit. She did not fear what he might say, however. He seemed conscious enough of his actions to keep something this private to himself. At least Diana had seen Arthur. She was keen to go to him, but she stayed in place, waiting for the conversation to end. Diana could see her mother take note of Diana's silence and turn after politely excusing herself. I believe Lady Hayat is across the way, Diana explained. I imagine it would be proper to greet her. Of course, Lady Hayat replied. Despite the confusion in her eyes, she smiled at Lord Templeton. If you will excuse us. Absolutely. Enjoy the afternoon, Lady St. Clair. Miss St. Clair. Diana followed her mother across the garden, her heart pounding with every step. She was so close to Arthur, and everything she had waited for was just within arm's reach. So long as Diana held her nerve, she believed she could finally be with the man she had loved for 5 years. All it would take was patience and caution, and a good amount of wit. Lord Arthur Hayat. The garden was brimming with colourful flowers, but none of them caught Arthur's eye. He was concerned only with one flower, and he had not yet seen her. Arthur, Lady Hayat said impatiently. Arthur tore his eyes away from the crowd to find Lady Edge fast approaching. I do not think it is wise to speak about this here. This does not concern you, Lady Hayat replied, sharply. I wish to greet my good friend. You must tolerate it." Arthur held his tongue. He had not considered the impact his choice might have on his mother, who had been acquainted with Lady Edge for some time. He felt a small stab of guilt at the realization. There were consequences to turning down Miss Edge. Arthur thought he had considered them all, but as he escorted his mother to Lady Edge, he realized that he had not. His desire to pursue Diana had overshadowed everything else. At least for the immediate moment, Arthur put aside his concerns. "Lady Edge," he said, "wonderful to see you." "And you, Lord Hayat. Lady Hayat, have you only just arrived?" Lady Edge inquired. She cast a glance to her side as if looking for someone, perhaps her daughter. "Yes," Lady Hayat said. "There were matters to address at the estate, and it was necessary for me to change my plans accordingly." "A pity." Lady Edge once again searched the garden, a faint hint of annoyance in her expression. "It would be nice if we could speak more. Preferably when my daughter has not disappeared with her escort." Lady Hayat's smile wavered. "Of course I will find you again before we leave." Arthur had no doubt that Lady Edge believed she had nearly secured a marriage for her daughter. The guilt that he felt was uncomfortable, but he was not inclined to reconsider. He had waited long enough for Diana. As Arthur led his mother away, he finally found Diana. She stood at the opposite end of the garden beside her mother. In the vivid colours of the garden, Diana stood out like a particularly beautiful rose. Her radiance seemed multiplied by the day's sunlight. Arthur's admiration of Diana was shaken when he noticed the young man Diana was engaged in conversation with. He recognised his old friend and cousin well, but he did not know what purpose Lord Templeton had in speaking to Diana. "Miss St. Clair is in attendance with her family," Arthur told his mother. She barely glanced in his direction, her expression set. "I am aware. I would like to visit with them." "You may attempt to once they are not already engaged in polite conversation," Lady Hayat replied, surprised. "Have your wits left you, Arthur? You were educated on the tenets of society." "I apologise, Mother. I simply want to make my intentions clear," he explained quietly. Lady Hayat followed Arthur's gaze to Diana. She hummed quietly when she noticed Lord Templeton's presence. Arthur was unsure whether he wished to hear what his mother would say about Diana and Lord Templeton. He already suspected the purpose of their introduction, and he was not pleased to know that he could not interrupt. "You know that Lord Templeton is in a position to inquire after Miss St. Clair," Lady Hayat finally said. "You should not be surprised there may be other suitors after her hand." "It is not the fact of her availability that I am surprised by," Arthur replied carefully. This was not the first time Arthur had seen his cousin since returning home. They had met briefly twice already, and Arthur had found himself on the same genial terms with Lord Templeton as he had been when he left. It was Lord Templeton's silence on the subject of marriage that startled Arthur, and the fact that it was Diana he was speaking to. "Though I admit, I have not seen Miss St. Clair entertain any eligible men in some time," Lady Hayat murmured. "Miss St. Clair has been conspicuously absent as of the past few years." "You say that he is in a position to inquire after marriage," Arthur said. "Is it possible that he is in a more favourable position than myself?" Lady Hayat pursed her lips. "He is younger than you, and closer to Miss St. Clair in station." "Qualities that do not worry me," Arthur replied. Despite Arthur's relief, there was a lingering doubt. He did not think Diana would accept Lord Templeton's advances. But if Lord Templeton was not the one who had arranged the introduction, there might have been another hand at work in the arrangement. If the Lord and Lady St. Clair preferred Lord Templeton to Arthur, there was no chance for him. Arthur could only hope that Diana had not yet spoken to her parents about him, and that his arrival would secure his chances with her. "Well, it seems Miss St. Clair is available," Lady Hayat said. "I suggest we make our way over if you are intent on speaking with her." Arthur led his mother across the garden, politely avoiding the mingling groups of people between himself and Diana. He finally reached her unhindered, relief washing over him. "Lord St. Clair, Lady St. Clair, honoured," Arthur began. His attention turned quickly to Diana. "Miss St. Clair, a pleasure. The garden has never been so beautiful." It was a bold move, but Arthur was not content to lose his chance. Diana averted her eyes and politely replied, "Lord Hayat, that is high praise indeed." Arthur was aware that his mother was speaking with Lady St. Clair, occupying her time in a bid to give him a false sense of privacy. If he lowered his voice, he could imagine he was alone with Diana. "I do not give it freely," Arthur said carefully. "I would have attended you sooner, but I noticed you were occupied by Lord Templeton." "It is polite to pay respects to the hosts," Diana replied. Her words were a clear indication that the conversation had been incidental. The reassurance bolstered Arthur's spirits. So long as Diana was uninterested in anyone else, he had nothing to lose. "It is admirable of you to do so," Arthur said. "I will likewise pursue the honourable route." Diana's eyes widened. "Is that so, Lord Hayat?" "Yes, Miss St. Clair." Arthur knew that Diana understood. He was finally prepared to approach her parents about courtship and marriage. Chapter 9. Diana was lost in thoughts of Arthur. He had appeared so gallantly at the garden party that she had once again wondered if he was simply a figment of her imagination. Her introduction to Lord Templeton was unfortunate, but his lack of interest had been reassuring. So long as Arthur approached her parents quickly, Diana hoped she would not be in the awkward position of refusing Lord Templeton's company without reason. "Miss St. Clair. Honestly, are you even listening?" Miss Lily exclaimed, affronted. "You are entirely out of sorts." "I'm sorry," Diana apologised quickly. "I'm distracted. My mind is elsewhere." "That much is clear," Miss Lily replied. The insult had faded from her expression, replaced by curiosity. "Whatever is the matter with you?" "Lord Hayat has communicated his intention to court me," Diana explained immediately. She held no reservations about speaking to Miss Lily now. Diana needed to speak with someone about the matter, and Miss Lily was a fast friend. She did not engage in gossip the same way that many other ladies did. Secrets were safe with her. "Lord Hayat?" Miss Lily inquired carefully. "He is the one that I've spoken of," Diana explained. "I was cautious to speak his name around others, out of fear that the situation might be discovered at an improper junction." "Do you mean... well, are you speaking of the Lord Hayat that recently returned?" Miss Lily persisted. Diana paused. Miss Lily's questioning had begun to worry her. "Yes. Miss Lily, is there something you're not telling me?" The silence that answered Diana's question did not comfort her. She sat unmoving, her heart sinking as Miss Lily gathered herself. Whatever news awaited her, she was uncertain she wished to hear it. "Well, I may be wrong, Miss St. Clair," Miss Lily began nervously. Diana shook her head. "I beg of you, Miss Lily, do not prolong my suffering. Tell me what it is you know." "Well, I have heard that it is Lord Hayat that Miss Edge's family has hoped to marry her to," Miss Lily confessed. She hurriedly added, "I may be incorrect. Perhaps I heard the name wrong, or it is some other man with the same name." "That must be it," Diana said immediately. Despite her agreement that it was a mistake, a gnawing fear began to grow in Diana's chest. It tore at her heart as she considered that Miss Lily might be correct. Diana could not withstand the thought that Arthur could be poised for an engagement with another woman. She shook her head and pressed a hand to her forehead. "It is not true. I saw him only days ago," Diana insisted. "He promised he would speak with Mother and Father." "Well, I only recently heard this from a young lady who often visits with Miss Edge," Miss Lily explained. "It seems that Miss Edge was so excited she let slip the man's name." "Yes. She's certainly of the disposition to do so," Diana murmured distractedly. She remembered Miss Edge's explanation of the way her suitor was much the same as Diana's. Diana knew there was little chance that Miss Edge's potential fiancé and Arthur were not the same person, but she could not accept that Arthur would be so cruel as to lead her on while he was going to be engaged to another woman. They had met only days ago, as she had told Miss Lily, and Arthur had been so earnest. He had seemed so dedicated and passionate each time they had met since his return, and she had not doubted his honesty. "Well, besides this, you are certain that he is honest and pure of intentions?" Miss Lily inquired. "Of course," Diana said immediately. "He is a gentleman of the highest calibre. He has conducted himself properly as long as I have known him." "I do not doubt as much," Miss Lily replied. She seemed uncertain, however. "What is it?" Diana sighed. "There is nothing left that could possibly hurt me so much as this." Miss Lily bit her lip. "Well, I do not mean to be disrespectful. You know we have been friends for some time, Miss St. Clair. I do not wish to upset you, and I would never do anything to bring you harm." "I understand," Diana replied quietly. "But you will harm me more by not simply speaking what is on your mind." The assertion was untrue. Diana knew that any more revelations about Arthur would hurt her beyond words, but she could not stomach the thought of being clueless about something that was apparently known to many others. Diana could not tolerate being the foolish, wronged woman. Even if it hurt, she was determined to hear the truth. "Diana, Lord Hayat is above your station," Miss Lily finally said. Diana laughed bitterly. "Oh, he's not that far above me, though I have considered the very same fact." It was the reason Diana had been so reluctant to accept Arthur's advances when they had first met. At all the balls and parties, Diana had seen many young women more suited to him than herself. She had resisted him as long as she could. Arthur had insisted that station was of no importance to him. The smallest difference between them was inconsequential, he said. Diana was a lady of the highest quality, and he was enraptured by her in a way that he had never been before. "I worry that perhaps, even if he does not wish to scorn you, he will have no choice," Miss Lily explained. "He would not," Diana insisted. "He is a man of honour, and he would never have expressed his interest if he was not willing to commit himself." "Perhaps when you were younger this was true," Miss Lily reminded Diana. "But years have passed, Miss St. Clair. It is unwise to believe that either of you have the same freedoms that you once did." "I am aware that things have changed," Diana said stiffly. "I have given this much thought, Miss Lily." Diana was not as confident as she attempted to sound. The knowledge that Miss Edge's family might have been in pursuit of a marriage to Arthur had stung. Arthur had not spoken of the matter or indicated that he was occupied with another courtship. If the engagement to Miss Edge was not of his making, it meant something even more dangerous for Diana. Her predicament would be complicated if the Lord and Lady Hayat were arranging the matter. "Perhaps your Lord Hayat is another man," Miss Lily offered. "Perhaps I misheard, and this is an unfortunate mistake." "It would be quite unfortunate," Diana replied, "but even if it is true, he would not abandon me without so much as a word." "Well, he is a distinguished gentleman," Miss Lily added. "He could refuse the offer or simply speak to the Lord and Lady Hayat about the arrangement." "They will have to agree to his desire to marry me," Diana realised, her heart sinking in her chest. All the dedication in the world meant nothing if Lord and Lady Hayat did not approve of Diana. Their blessing was paramount, and Diana would never ask Arthur to forsake his name and title for her. Diana's family would not allow her to make such a decision if it came to that. They would likely lock her away and secure a marriage to Lord Templeton instead, and Diana would have no choice but to accept. Miss Lily worriedly smoothed her skirts with restless hands. "Well, all this fretting will not do you any good." "What else am I to do?" Diana whispered, distraught. "I cannot do anything to ensure my position. You have said it yourself, Lord Hayat is above my station. I have little chance." "Oh, Miss St. Clair." Miss Lily leaned closer to Diana, her expression drawn with worry. "I never meant to distress you so. I only thought you should know what might be occurring without your knowledge." "I'm glad you have told me," Diana replied, though her heart ached fiercely. "I will conduct myself differently in Lord Hayat's presence. If he has been dishonest with me, I will not be a willing party to his machinations any longer." Miss Lily was silent. Diana could not think of anything else to say about the matter. She was heavy with the burden of knowledge that Lord Hayat might not have been honest with her. 5 years Diana had waited, and just when she thought her happy ending had arrived, her life was thrown into disarray once again. Diana wished she could return to the days of her youth when she had first met Arthur. If she had simply insisted that he speak with her father instead of worrying that he was above her station, perhaps they could have been married. "What will you do?" Miss Lily asked. "There is no doubt that it is suspicious." "Perhaps I will speak with Miss Edge about her engagement. If it truly is the same man who has been pursuing us, she deserves to know just as I did," Diana decided. "Are you certain? Would it not be best to approach Lord Hayat before you tell Miss Edge something so upsetting?" "I do not think she is so delicate," Diana exclaimed, surprised, "though you may be correct that I should withhold my judgment." "I do hope we are wrong about this matter," Miss Lily said quietly. "From all that you told me about Lord Hayat's behaviour, I believed he was an honourable and romantic man." "As did I." Diana could close her eyes and remember just how Arthur had looked at her in the garden only days ago. She remembered the nervous beat of her heart and the way she had wished they could be together at last. Arthur had returned to her, as dedicated as he had been when he left. He was the same man, or so Diana believed. Hearing that he might have been in the position of marrying another woman crushed Diana, and she was desperate to believe it was untrue. For 5 years Diana had stared longingly at the flower Arthur had left her. She had traced its paper-thin petals, dry and delicate, and hoped that he would return to her. Now Diana feared that he was right before her, but just out of reach. "This will work for you," Miss Lily said confidently, her expression one of determination and hope. "After all you have endured, Miss St. Clair, I believe you deserve this happiness." "I hope you're right, Miss Lily." Diana did not remind Miss Lily that plenty of young couples were married for convenience, and that a marriage of love was rare. Miss Lily nodded distractedly. Yes, I believe Lord Hayat will prove himself honourable. You will have a happy ending at last, Miss St. Clair. You have been virtuous and true, and Lord Hayat will honour you." "This will pass," Diana agreed, though the words were bitter in her mouth. "It is a simple mistake. I will learn the truth from Miss Edge, and in the end we will laugh at the foolishness of our fears." Diana did not know what to believe. She no longer knew whom to trust, aside from Miss Lily. Her heart was weak from the storms that had tossed her since Arthur had first departed, and there was no end in sight. Diana could only hope that she was proven wrong and she could rest easy when Arthur finally proposed. Chapter 10. Lady Hayat had insisted that Arthur leave the house while she spoke with his father. As unwilling as Arthur was to be absent from the conversation, he understood the gravity of the situation and left it to his mother to handle. Arthur set his mind on his cousin instead. He was uncertain whether he should directly approach Lord Templeton about Diana, but there was little else he could think of to ensure that he did not misstep and insult his family and good friend. This was why Arthur sat with Lord Templeton contemplating how best to begin the conversation at hand. "I appreciate your time, Lord Templeton. I apologise that I inquired after a visit with such short notice." "I am always happy to see you," Lord Templeton replied. He smiled widely and took a seat across from Arthur. "You may be less formal with me, Lord Hayat. I do not care much for ceremony." "You never have," Arthur laughed. "It is good to know that much has not changed." "Of course not." Lord Templeton waved a hand toward the nearby bookcase. "I am still unfortunately an academic, to my poor mother's dismay." Arthur frowned. "Well, I'm sure she appreciates the noble pursuit more than is apparent. I hear you graduated with the highest honours." "That I did." Lord Templeton laughed. Lord Templeton was a genial man, and Arthur appreciated the ease of his attitude. It made the looming conversation less ominous. Arthur hoped that he could explain himself fully, and perhaps ensure that there were no hard feelings between them. Arthur had never needed to speak to another man about a conflict of interest in this manner. His experience was lacking, but he took comfort in the knowledge that Lord Templeton was difficult to insult. "I must confess I arranged this meeting with a specific motive in mind," Arthur said. "I would like to be frank with you, as one man to another." "Is it so serious?" Lord Templeton asked, shocked. "You have only just returned. Surely I have not done anything yet to mistakenly earn your ire." "No, of course not," Arthur said quickly. "Nothing of the sort." "Then, whatever could it be?" Lord Templeton frowned, his gaze searching. "Is there some other matter you must unburden yourself of?" "Well, I would like to inquire after your intentions," Arthur began. He considered his words carefully. "After a certain Miss St. Clair, please understand that I mean neither disrespect nor challenge." Lord Templeton was silent for a long moment. Arthur nearly feared that perhaps he had spoken too freely, and that Lord Templeton would give him a fair piece of his mind. Instead, Lord Templeton laughed nervously. "I must confess, Arthur, as badly as this reflects upon me, I do not have a clue of whom you are speaking about." "Why, Miss St. Clair?" Arthur replied, incredulous. "You were in conversation with her at the garden party not 2 days past, were you not? Or do you mean to lie to my face about the matter?" "Oh!" Lord Templeton exclaimed, startled. "This is quiet, embarrassing. Forgive me, Lord Hayat. The day was something of a blur for me. I was introduced to many, wonderful ladies." Arthur nearly sighed in relief. The sudden disbelief and anger he had felt dissipated when he realised that Lord Templeton was being completely honest. After the surprise passed, Arthur was left somewhat embarrassed of his sudden judgment. It was unlike Arthur to judge others so poorly. He knew it was a consequence of his impatience concerning Diana, but he still felt ridiculous enough to apologise. "I am sorry, Lord Templeton," Arthur replied. "It was unfair of me to become so readily offensive. I expect Miss St. Clair must be important to you, that you were so easily incensed," Lord Templeton replied. He still sounded puzzled, as if the entire situation were alien to him. "You are truly not interested in courting her?" Arthur pressed. Lord Templeton sighed. "Lord Hayat, I can assure you, courtship is the least of my concerns at this moment in my life. I hardly met her. We have only just been acquainted." "I confess I'm glad to hear it," Arthur replied. It was a relief to know that Lord Templeton was not interested in courting Diana. However, Arthur was still uncertain of his future with her. It occurred to Arthur that he might seek counsel with Lord Templeton. If anything, he might provide sympathy and a chance for Arthur to unburden himself. The chaos of Arthur's return and his attempts to secure Diana once again were straining. "You do not seem entirely happy," Lord Templeton noted. "This is not all that was bothering you." "No," Arthur admitted. "There is more." "Well, I will not profess myself to be particularly adept at matters of courtship, but I am willing to listen," Lord Templeton submitted. "If anything, I might at least provide a unique perspective." "Unique, indeed," Arthur replied. He laughed tiredly and rose to his feet, suddenly restless. Now that his fears were assuaged, Arthur was left to ruminate on the fact of the matter and the true obstacles he had yet to face. His confidence in Diana's commitment had not wavered, but his belief in his chances was beginning to dwindle. If someone such as Lord Templeton caused Arthur to fear for his future with Diana, there was no telling what stress any other potential suitor might bring. "Go on then," Lord Templeton said expectantly. "You clearly have much on your mind. Am I to assume this is about Miss St. Clair?" "It is," Arthur admitted. He sighed and paced behind the sofa, nervous energy consuming his body. "I inquired after your intentions because I feared I might lose her." "Then you are intending to court her?" "I am intending to propose." Lord Templeton made a noise of surprise. "Well, that seems rather sudden." "We were acquainted before my departure," Arthur replied dismissively. "I have no doubts about her willingness on the matter. Or rather, I had none." Arthur was reluctant to admit that his suspicions about Lord Templeton had only made him aware that he doubted the entire arrangement. "You do not sound certain," Lord Templeton ventured. "Well, I believed that I was," Arthur replied. "But as of late I have realised that perhaps I am imagining that things are just as they were in my youth." Perhaps Diana was simply acquiescing because Arthur had returned to her immediately after his return to town. Arthur feared that he would steal her chances with someone more suitable than himself. It was a fear he could not admit. Arthur knew he was beyond Diana's station and more than a fit match for her. Yet he could not bear the thought of tying her to him in a marriage that she would regret. "It seems to me that Miss St. Clair has not changed in her devotion," Lord Templeton said carefully. "I did not wish to insult Miss St. Clair, but she did inquire after you at the party." "Perhaps," Arthur admitted, "but I cannot help my worries that she has been placed in an impossible position. I do not even know if her family would agree to the union." "How could they not?" Lord Templeton arched an eyebrow. "You are set to be a duke. It would be an honour for them to wed their daughter to you." "Even if they were to agree, I do not wish to force Miss St. Clair into marriage." Arthur sighed and finally took a seat once again, exhausted by his worries. "She may only be humouring me because of my station, you understand?" Lord Templeton was silent as he contemplated Arthur's words. It was all true, of course, and it was excruciating for Arthur to lay his troubles so readily at another's feet. In his time away, Arthur had become entirely self-sufficient. Returning to Diana had reminded him how much he was willing to give for her, and how much his happiness hinged on hers. "I do not think you need to doubt her," Lord Templeton said seriously. "From what I have seen and know, I believe she is as honest as you." "Well, perhaps you could assist me in this," Arthur realised suddenly. "If you were to request an audience with her and perhaps suggest courtship, we could learn whether she's truly committed." Lord Templeton's eyes widened in surprise. "I will forgive you this shocking idea because I know how dearly you wish for Miss St. Clair to accept." "You are right, of course," Arthur replied. The very thought he had spoken only moments before was just as shocking to himself. "I do not know what I was thinking." "You were not," Lord Templeton replied. "But as I said, you have wanted this dearly for some time." Time was the issue, Arthur thought. If he simply had more time, perhaps he could have comfortably pursued Diana. All the time in the world could not change the past. It was such a trivial thing that Arthur had not proposed to Diana before he left, but he knew it would have changed everything. "I have simply been swayed by unforeseen circumstances," Arthur confessed. "It was my mother's intention for me to perhaps wed another. I could not allow the courtship to begin, given my interest in Miss St. Clair." "Well, if you have already withdrawn from a possible engagement, why are you in such a state?" Lord Templeton asked, incredulous. "Simply go to Miss St. Clair and propose. You have already said that she is willing." "It is not that simple. There is a proper way to do so," Arthur said. Lord Templeton sighed. "Then, by all means do so. You have not expressed one reason why this should not go in your favour." "Aside from the chance that her family might object, or that she might not be as willing as I believe." "You will not discern the truth if you do not take a chance," Lord Templeton reminded Arthur. He frowned and added, "I seem to remember you having no qualms about doing what was courageous." "Of course not. But Miss St. Clair's honour is at stake." "Well, unless you behave like an absolute rake, I do not see how you would dishonour her." Lord Templeton paused as if he would say more. Arthur waited patiently for a moment before prompting, "Well, you have more to say?" "At the risk of earning your ire, Lord Hayat, I believe you are simply reluctant to finally marry the woman you have dreamed of for so long," Lord Templeton admitted. "Reluctant," Arthur exclaimed. "She was the first that I turned to once I arrived." "I do not doubt it," Lord Templeton replied, "but it is so sudden after your arrival that I do not think you have had time to acclimate." "I thought of nothing but her when I was away," Arthur argued. "Yet you believe I am reluctant to pursue her." "Nothing of the sort," Lord Templeton clarified. "I only believe you are approaching a serious commitment, and you are understandably anxious to prove yourself worthy of your title and station." Perhaps Lord Templeton was correct. At least Arthur could agree that he wished to be just as gallant as Diana remembered him. "Then how do I proceed?" Arthur asked, "if I wish to finally secure her hand in marriage?" "Speak with Lord St. Clair, of course," Lord Templeton said. "Be honest with the man, and he will undoubtedly concede." "Perhaps," Arthur murmured. The thought of finally beginning a proper courtship with Diana, publicly and with the intent of proposing, was tantalizing. "You may be right that I have simply been away too long." "That is all," Lord Templeton agreed. "You are an upstanding gentleman, Lord Hayat. Miss St. Clair undoubtedly believes as much." Arthur certainly hoped that Lord Templeton was correct. With a newfound determination, he silently pledged to formally approach Lord St. Clair about his daughter. It was high time that he did. Chapter 11. Lady Hertford hosted a party every season, and this year was no exception. Diana always enjoyed the parties, but she could not truly allow herself to enjoy the evening. Diana could not help but compare the night to another one 5 years ago. The bittersweet memory made her heart ache longingly. It had been a time of absolute joy when she had no reservations about Arthur or his intentions toward her. "This must be difficult for you," Miss Lily murmured. She stood by Diana's side, politely nodding at passers-by. "It is." Diana searched the crowd, but she had little energy to spare on the pursuit. Her heart simply was not bound to the task. It felt like more of a burden than anything else. Miss Lily sighed. "Miss St. Clair, you must not give up hope just yet. There is still a chance this may be a misunderstanding." "With each passing day I begin to lose faith," Diana replied. She did not wish to admit it, but she could not deny that her strength was fading. "Perhaps it is best that I allow this to end." "You must not," Miss Lily insisted. "Do you not remember your joy at discovering he had returned to you? You cannot simply forget. Not after you have been true for 5 years." "Perhaps you are right," Diana said quietly. "But I am tired, Miss Lily. I do not have the fortitude to suffer another blow to my heart." Arthur was nowhere to be seen. Diana wondered if something had prevented his attendance and found herself conflicted. Part of her wished he would not attend so that she might postpone the confrontation. Yet another part of her desperately wanted to see Arthur so that he might prove her fears unfounded. Diana did not doubt that Arthur would be engaged by the end of the season. The only question was to whom he would offer the honour. Like a young girl, Diana had believed that Arthur would simply propose to her and refuse advances from any other front. Standing uncertain now, Diana realised her foolishness and naivete. "Perhaps you could speak with Lord Templeton. They are good friends, and Lord Templeton is wont to provide information that he otherwise should not," Miss Lily suggested. "You may be right." Diana thought of Lord Templeton's casual manner when they had first been acquainted. "Though I fear he might likewise communicate my inquiries to Lord Hayat." "All the better," Miss Lily exclaimed. "You will not need to broach the subject with Lord Hayat then. It is a perfect opportunity." "I suppose." Diana uncertainly gazed across the gathered crowd, toward the far wall of the ballroom where Lord Templeton was politely standing with a group of young men. "Will your cousin escort us, do you think?" "Of course." Miss Lily turned away to signal to her cousin. Diana steeled herself. Her nerves were in shambles from her recent discovery of Lord Hayat's possible entanglement, and they were worsened by the energetic crowd. Lord Templeton, at least, was a man Diana knew to be pleasant in conversation. Despite his lack of refined tact, he was honest, and Diana required honesty. Lord Templeton noted their approach just before they arrived. He turned and smiled pleasantly, greeting them with a somewhat informal tone. "Miss St. Clair, a pleasure to see you again." Despite her frustration, Diana was amused by Lord Templeton's clumsy ways. She smiled behind her fan and waited for Miss Lily's cousin to introduce her. The young men beside Lord Templeton were all introduced in kind, and their conversation shifted to include Miss Lily and her cousin. "Lord Templeton, I hope you are enjoying the evening," Diana said. Lord Templeton nodded. "Yes, it is quite an event. I trust you are doing well." "I am." Diana considered her words carefully, uncertain of how best to inquire after Lord Hayat. She found no easy answer, and so instead simply spoke her mind. "I have not seen many familiar faces. Even Lord and Lady Hayat seem to be absent." "Well, they should be in attendance," Lord Templeton replied immediately. "Though they may be waylaid, I believe Lord Hayat has been burdened with quite an amount of responsibility these past weeks." "He is truly honourable for his service," Diana said. She was only partly attentive anymore. It had hardly taken effort to receive an answer from Lord Templeton. Now that Diana knew the Hayats would attend, she could prepare herself for the inevitable. As much as she feared Arthur's answer, she knew she could not continue without knowing whether he meant to betray her or not. At least this way, Diana hoped she could spare herself embarrassment. If Arthur was required to relinquish his pursuit of her, she did not wish to shame herself by meeting with him elsewhere only to be let down. The party was public enough that their conversation might be missed, and Diana spared in the process. "I suggest that you make your way toward the entryway, if you wish to greet them when they arrive," Lord Templeton suddenly said. "It is likely that Lady Hertford will wish to speak with Lady Hayat at the moment she sees her. They will be occupied for some time." "Thank you for the advice," Diana replied, surprised. Perhaps Lord Templeton was more astute than she had given him credit for. Lord Templeton nodded politely. "Of course, Miss St. Clair. I wish you luck." Diana carefully caught Miss Lily's attention. They made their farewells and began to move away while Diana leaned close to explain herself. "Lord Templeton has said that I should wait near the entryway," Diana said. "He says that Lady Hayat and Lady Hertford might speak for some time when the Hayats arrive." Lord Templeton certainly has his uses, Miss Lily murmured, her eyebrows arched. I must re-evaluate my estimation of him. Diana did not answer. She found herself instead looking toward the foyer where she saw the Hayats had recently arrived. The rush of excitement she felt at seeing Arthur set her heart beating faster. All joy Diana might have felt was instantly lost when she realized that Arthur was in conversation with Miss Edge. The very sight made her chest ache and her head swirl with despair. Miss St. Clair, Miss Lily began, her voice unsteady. She sounded as if she could not believe her eyes. Diana could not either. Please, Miss Lily, Diana whispered. I do not wish to see any more. Lord Arthur Hayat. Arthur arrived at the party with every intention of finding Lord and Lady St. Clair. He was determined to prove himself to Diana, and he no longer had any reason to provide excuses to her or himself. Unfortunately, Arthur had not taken one step before he found himself accosted by Lady Edge and her daughter. He very nearly ran into Miss Edge as she appeared by his side, her smile coy. Ah, Lady Edge, Miss Edge, Arthur said quickly. Always a pleasure. Both women bowed politely, but Arthur knew Lady Edge would pursue conversation with his mother. Arthur was left to face the expectant Miss Edge, whose innocent features gave him pause. Arthur did not wish to cause Miss Edge any disrespect, but he could see Lord and Lady St. Clair in the distance. He restrained himself and instead turned to Miss Edge. I hope you are enjoying your evening, Miss Edge. Of course, Miss Edge replied politely, although I must say it cheers me to see you did not befall any harm. What do you mean? Arthur frowned, confused. Well, it seemed that you would not be in attendance. I thought it very uncharacteristic and feared perhaps something had happened to detain you, Miss Edge replied. I am glad to see I was mistaken. Arthur smiled uneasily. He did not wish to be disingenuous, but he could not think of a way to politely explain his position to her. Miss Edge seemed unaware of his disinterest, and Arthur did not think it wise to censure her in public. Lady Edge was still in conversation with Lady Hayat, and there was no telling when they would part ways. Arthur reminded himself that he had promised to speak with Lord St. Clair and decided that he would need to excuse himself, as uncomfortable as that might become. Miss Edge did not give Arthur an opportunity. Have you enjoyed your return to town? She inquired suddenly. It seems so difficult that you have been present this season after so many years being away. It is a relief to have returned, Arthur replied distractedly. He thought he caught a glimpse of Diana somewhere, but he lost her as soon as he had found her. There is no difficulty to it. It helps to reconnect with former acquaintances. Miss Edge seemed unsatisfied either by Arthur's answer or his distraction. A flicker of disappointment shone in her eyes, but her smile did not waver. That is heartening to hear. Have you visited the new park yet? It was established in your absence, I believe. I have not. I have been quite occupied since my return, Arthur said. Miss Edge was, as reluctant as Arthur was to admit it, an obstacle. Her polite conversation stood in the way of his plans to approach Lord and Lady St. Clair. He could not excuse himself too quickly. Aside from her convenient interruption, Arthur suspected Miss Edge might not be as innocent as he had first assumed. She seemed intent on keeping him, even if there were no words of value exchanged between them. Perhaps my cousin has sent an invitation to his hunting party, Miss Edge suggested. It would be a pleasant experience and a welcome excursion. I am sure it will be a pleasant affair, Arthur replied politely. He did not wish to explain to Miss Edge that he was not interested in such an excursion. He had hardly been allowed to rest since his return. Miss Edge smiled prettily. I will be sure to inquire after the party. If he has not sent word to you, it is likely simple forgetfulness. It has been so long since we have had the honour of your company. Truly it has. Arthur could see Lord and Lady St. Clair making their way toward him. He was hopeful they would approach and perhaps spare him the need to excuse himself. "But you seem distracted, Lord Hayat," Miss Edge noted. There was a hopeful glimmer in her eyes as she said, "I hope I am not keeping you. If you wish to speak with my father, I will gladly defer." "That is not necessary," Arthur said quickly. He could not take the chance that he might be placed in an awkward position. "I apologize, Miss Edge. Please excuse me." Arthur quickly excused himself to Lady Edge. He hardly paid any attention to the exchange, intent on catching Lord and Lady St. Clair. Unfortunately, as soon as he began walking toward them, he saw that they had entered conversation with another family. Arthur desperately searched for Diana. If he could find her, he reasoned that he could at least explain his position to her. Diana suddenly appeared to him as the crowd shifted, and Arthur quickly turned to pursue her. He caught her eye, but just as quickly as she had seen him, she turned away. Before Arthur could reach Diana, he found himself faced with his cousin. "Lord Templeton," he exclaimed, "I apologize. I am in a hurry." "Lord Hayat," Lord Templeton said seriously. He placed a hand on Arthur's arm, cautioning, "Miss St. Clair does not wish to speak with you." "What?" Arthur withdrew his arm, shocked. "What is your purpose?" Lord Templeton glanced toward Diana. "She witnessed you in conversation with Miss Edge. I believe she is upset. Perhaps now is not the best time." "I cannot let her believe that I have acted dishonourably," Arthur argued. "I must explain myself." "Wait," Lord Templeton insisted, "and speak with Lord and Lady St. Clair. Miss St. Clair will not listen to you now." As much as Arthur wanted to pursue Diana, he knew Lord Templeton was correct. Diana had turned away from him when he attempted to follow her, and Arthur feared he would only begin an argument if he persisted. At least for the moment, Arthur would withdraw and speak to Lord St. Clair about a formal visit to his daughter. Arthur cast one last glance toward Diana, aching to speak with her, and turned away. Chapter 12. As Diana gazed out one of the windows in her family's sitting room, she followed the path of a bluebird that flew away from the estate. It was unfettered, free to roam where it wished, content and bright as the sky. Once again Diana was alone. The situation felt worse to her. Arthur was in town, so near to her, yet she could not reach out to him. He seemed to be further than he had ever been before. At least when he was away. She had known that he was unreachable to everyone. "Have you been here all morning?" Lady St. Clair asked from the doorway, incredulous. She entered the room, a small stack of letters in hand. Diana turned her eyes back to the window. "Has so much time passed? I had not realized." "That is not comforting." Lady St. Clair approached Diana, her brow furrowed with concern. "I believed that you were changed. You had seemed so much happier as of late." "Did I?" Diana wondered. She wondered if it had been apparent to everyone. Perhaps the gossip of the season was her change in attitude. At least it was not her clandestine romance with Arthur. Diana did not know what she would do if she was exposed to society. She wondered if her mother would send her away and if she would tarnish her family's name. Perhaps it was better if she did not pursue a relationship with Lord Hayat. Diana was acutely aware of what might be said if she became engaged to him. Society was not kind to women such as her, beyond their marriageable years and marrying up. They would accuse her of climbing the social ladder. "Sit with me," Lady St. Clair said suddenly. She held the letters in her hand as if they might shield her from whatever thoughts Diana was having. "It will not do you well to stay silent about whatever it is that plagues you so." Diana reluctantly left the window and sat with her mother. She did not wish to explain her encounter with Lord Hayat, so she chose to speak first. "I am simply occupied with thoughts of marriage. You recall Lord Templeton?" "Well, Yes, Lady St. Clair replied, surprised. But it was my impression that you were entertaining Lord Hayat. I spoke with Lord Templeton at yesterday evening's ball, Diana pressed. She hoped her mother would abandon the subject of Lord Hayat. He was pleasant in conversation. It is nice that you think so. Lady St. Clair seemed unconvinced. She frowned, but before she could inquire after Lord Hayat again, Diana interrupted. I would not be averse to sharing his company another time. It was not entirely untrue. Diana believed Lord Templeton was a pleasant man, and she did not find his manner disagreeable. There were worse choices that Diana could make. If she could not have the dream that she had so dedicatedly protected when Arthur had left, she believed it would at least be simple to set her sights on another gentleman. Lord Templeton was kind and straightforward. Diana did not doubt that she would be in good company with him, and he would be true and honest with her. Perhaps he was not incredibly charming or social, but she believed Lord Templeton was a good man. Lady St. Clair anxiously shuffled the letters in her hand. It would be simple to arrange, she admitted, but I do not understand your change of heart. Has Lord Hayat done something untoward? No, of course not, Diana replied quickly. It stung to defend Arthur, as much as she did not believe he would intentionally do anything to hurt her. I simply understand my station. It was childish of me to wait so stubbornly. I'm only sorry if it has reflected poorly upon the family. Well, Lady St. Clair seemed at a loss for words. The faint guilt written on her face suggested that she felt in part responsible for Diana's resignation. There is still some time. If you wish to wait— No, Diana said quickly. She averted her eyes, hoping the outburst had not revealed the truth. I truly do believe that this is for the best. If that is the case, then I suppose I could make an inquiry, Lady St. Clair said uncertainly. She did not seem eager to do so. Of course, now that Lord Hayat had openly approached Diana at two separate events, Lady St. Clair believed that Diana had a chance. If there was a chance, Lady St. Clair would encourage it. Only Diana knew the truth, and she would not speak her shame to her mother. She left her pain in silence and instead nodded politely to her mother. Thank you. I believe he's an honourable man. I am happy to have been acquainted with him, Diana murmured. If her hopes were gone, the least Diana could do was marry for the convenience of her family. She would not stay a spinster her entire life, and she would not submit to making a fool of herself chasing after Lord Hayat. There was little left to do but accept her fate. Diana only hoped that she could do so with dignity. Lord Arthur Hayat. Arthur had politely declined an invitation to play cards with some of his former friends. Their confusion had been clear to him, but he hardly cared to explain himself. He was overcome with anxieties about Diana, and he could not entertain the thought of revelry. The ball had ended without Arthur speaking to Diana once. He had instead spent his time politely speaking with Lord St. Clair, until Arthur had predictably been drawn away to speak with the host. As much as Arthur believed it was best not to pressure Diana after she'd seen him with Miss Edge, Arthur wished he could have simply spoken to her. You have a visitor, Larry Hayat announced. From the doorway, she raised an eyebrow at her son. You really should tell me when you have invited guests. I did not, Arthur replied, surprised. He nearly jumped to his feet. Well, who is it? Only me, Lord Templeton said, as he approached from the entryway. He smiled politely. Thank you, Lady Hayat. Lady Hayat excused herself. Arthur did his best not to appear quite as disappointed as he felt. Some part of him had imagined that it might have been Lord St. Clair who had arrived, come with the good news that Diana had accepted his proposal. Lord Hayat, I must confess that I find your lack of joy in receiving me quite refreshing, Lord Templeton said, amused. Arthur sighed, gesturing for Lord Templeton to sit. Forgive me, my friend. I am simply distracted. You mean to say that you expected someone else? Lord Templeton replied. There was no insult in his words, it was a statement of fact. I am not a fool, Lord Hayat. No, of course not, Arthur replied. He sank into a chair and stared bleakly out the window behind Lord Templeton. I spoke to Lord St. Clair. Lord Templeton made a noise of surprise and quickly sat across from Arthur. Did you? What did he say? He was polite, Arthur said vaguely. He has permitted me to court Miss St. Clair, but I fear it may be too late. As relieved as Arthur had been to receive Lord St. Clair's blessing, the fact remained that Diana had withdrawn from Arthur. There was a chance that even if Arthur extended an invitation to her, she would refuse out of dignity and a desire to protect her reputation. With Miss Edge's family intent on presenting their daughter to Arthur and Lord Templeton's family considering Diana, Arthur felt that they were being pulled apart by the world. They grew further apart with each passing day. You have his permission, yet still you are melancholy, Lord Templeton said sharply. I find it hard to sympathise, Lord Hayat. What could possibly be preventing you from approaching her now? If I pursue Miss St. Clair, I risk dishonouring Miss Edge, Arthur replied, incensed. The ramifications could be astounding, aside from which you are well aware that your family has manoeuvred you to become an option for Miss St. Clair. Lord Templeton shook his head as he reclined in his seat. I have told you that I have no interest in Miss St. Clair. I would not offer a proposal to her, even if pressured. You do not know that your conviction will hold true. Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, considering his choices. I have a title to uphold, Lord Templeton. As much as I may want to pursue Miss St. Clair, there is much more at stake. Arthur had not wished to admit as much. He'd feared to speak the words aloud, as they were weighty and severe. The very thought of the burden that lay on his shoulders made his heart sink. Perhaps Arthur had imagined that his return would be dramatic and perfect. He had believed that he could simply arrive and sweep Diana off her feet. He was so secure in his station and her love for him that he believed they could transcend any and all obstacles placed before them. Now, Arthur was painfully aware of how naive it had been for him to expect that he would have just what he desired upon returning home. There were other, more important matters that required his attention. Lord Templeton leaned forward. You are a disingenuous, unfaithful man, Lord Hayat. I beg your pardon, Arthur cried. He stood immediately, a flame burning in his chest at the insult. Would you care to repeat yourself, Lord Templeton? Certainly. Lord Templeton remained seated, apparently unbothered by his horrifying misstep. You have led Miss St. Clair along on a merry romp, and you had no intentions to wed her. You have excused yourself from all responsibility, even though she has waited a good 5 years for your return. This is not true, Arthur exclaimed angrily. My absence was not of my own making. Immediately upon my return, I sought to find Miss St. Clair once again. I did not pursue her until I spoke to her and ensured that she was still of the same heart. Lord Templeton was silent for a long moment. Arthur did not sit, his heart still racing in his chest. He was tempted to challenge Lord Templeton in some fashion, as honour would dictate. Arthur waited for an explanation. Finally, Lord Templeton gave one. You are exactly correct, he said. Though you do not seem to believe it. Having heard it from your own mouth, do you now understand? Arthur sank into his seat once again. The indignant flame in his chest flickered and died, and he was left with the exhaustion of having indulged in the outburst. I believe I do. Good. Lord Templeton nodded sharply as if that sealed the matter. "You have acted honourably until this point, Lord Hayat. Do not disgrace Miss St. Clair now. Do what is expected of you and act as a man would. Explain yourself to her." Lord Templeton was correct. Arthur knew his course. He would request an audience with Diana and explain his position. Once she knew the truth, she would undoubtedly return to him once again. Chapter 13. Lady St. Clair appeared in the doorway once again just after she had greeted Miss Lily. Diana looked to her mother, surprised. "What is it?" "A letter from Lord Hayat," Lady St. Clair said carefully. She paused, either for effect or due to some other hesitancy. "He has requested a visit." Diana schooled her features despite the pang of sorrow that shook her heart. "I see. I will address it at a later time." Diana was aware that Miss Lily was uncertainly trading a silent look with Lady St. Clair. Their apparent concern was of little importance to Diana. She could hardly concentrate on the illusion of peace she was attempting to portray. "Very well." Lady St. Clair withdrew, casting one last glance toward her daughter. "We will speak later." Once Lady St. Clair had left, the room was uncomfortably silent. Diana decided to bear the silence until Miss Lily saw fit to break it. Unfortunately, Diana could not last as long as Miss Lily. She gave up her silence after only a few minutes, agitatedly reaching for her teacup and finding that it granted her little escape. "You wish to say something?" Diana said sharply. "This is obvious." Miss Lily worried at the sleeve of her dress. "I have not come here to upset you, Miss St. Clair. If it is better that I leave—" "No," Diana replied suddenly. The combative resistance she had felt seemed to dissipate all at once, and she was left embarrassed by her words. "I am sorry, Miss Lily. I have been short with you." "For good reason," Miss Lily reassured Diana. "Though I wish you would remember that I am your friend and not an adversary in this matter." She was correct, of course. Diana sighed as she considered her tea. Her appetite had failed as of late. So much of Arthur's return had not carried on the way Diana had expected it to. Despite her age, Diana had imagined that things would be as they were when she was a young woman. Arthur's return had rekindled a youthful joy in Diana, and she had expected that time would simply turn back for her. "I fear I am in part to blame for the turn things have taken," Diana confessed quietly. "However so?" Miss Lily asked, incredulous. "You have done nothing but stay true to a man who promised himself to you." "Perhaps, but I have done so foolishly, and with little consideration for our positions," Diana replied. She shook her head and added, "It may be a good deal of fault that lies with me. I have forced Lord Hayat into an impossible position." "You have not." Miss Lily stood suddenly pacing toward a nearby bookshelf. "I have been with you throughout this matter, Miss St. Clair. Nothing you have done was untoward." "That is not what I mean," Diana sighed. "I have not been inappropriate, but I believe I've acted childishly." There was not much that Diana could do to turn back time. She and Arthur had both been young and foolish to pledge their undying love. The more foolish choice, however, had been to reaffirm a decision made in their youth. The passion of young love had blinded Diana to the truth. At least now that she was faced with reality, Diana could see what her path would be. "I do not think you should act hastily," Miss Lily said patiently. "Nothing has happened yet, and you have not been impolite about the matter." "Perhaps not. But I have seen that Miss Edge is publicly involved with Lord Hayat. I would be stubborn to refuse the fact." "Surely you do not mean to approach her?" "Certainly not," Diana said quickly, "but I believe it would be best for me to release Lord Hayat from his promise." Miss Lily wrung her hands, coming to sit near Diana once again. "Are you absolutely certain?" He might think that you have lost interest. What if he does not pursue you any longer? Then it was not meant to be, Diana said. She did not believe her own words. They were words she had heard women speak as polite means of comfort to those who were wronged or disappointed in love. The trite sentiment did little to soothe Diana's aching heart. "I must say something to you," Miss Lily blurted. "I withheld myself from doing so out of respect and honour, but I cannot do so any longer." Diana's eyes widened as she considered her friend. "Whatever is the matter?" "I believe that Miss Edge has plotted against you," Miss Lily insisted. Her sudden involvement with Lord Hayat has come as a complete surprise. Even the friend she confessed to about her proposal was shocked to hear it. "Well, it could clearly be her family organising the arrangement," Diana argued. Still, she felt an unease at Miss Lily's insistence. Miss Lily laughed shortly. "She has only just debuted, and there are many eligible men who are younger and more readily interested to some extent. Besides, I think it is too convenient that she appeared in our inner circle just as you had found happiness with Lord Hayat." "Well, what if it is the truth?" "I cannot blame her," Diana said. "If she's fallen in love, she has only made the same mistake that I have." "She does not love him," Miss Lily scoffed. "Miss Edge is as interested in romance as I am in academics. Her purpose is his title, and perhaps the drama of an engagement to him." Diana paused and stared into her tea. She had not wanted to think badly of Miss Edge, but her memory of their conversation was not favourable. Miss Lily leaned closer to Diana, her hand at Diana's wrist in a reassuring signal of solidarity. "Miss St. Clair, if you wish to secure your chances, I see nothing standing in your way besides Miss Edge. Confront her about her conduct, and perhaps you will learn the truth." "I will," Diana said quietly, "and I will end this torment." Lord Arthur Hayat. Arthur sealed his request for a visit and sent it away, but only hours after it left his hands, he wondered if it was too soon or too forward. His only wish was to earn Diana's trust and love once again, and he knew there was little time to spare. The pressure for Arthur to marry was persistent, and he knew it was a risk for him to indulge his romance with Diana. Lord Templeton's words rang in his ears, however, and Arthur believed them to be true. After 5 years, Diana had proven true. If Arthur were to disregard the dedication they had both shown to one another in their time apart, he would be little more than a liar and a fool. "Arthur, Lady Marriott is here," Lady Hayat announced from the hallway, her tone one of gentle admonishment. "Yes," Arthur replied immediately, jolted from thought. He rose from his place in the parlour, abandoning the chair to greet his cousin. "Lady Marriott, it has been too long." "Certainly it has," Lady Marriott replied. Her eyes were bright as she smiled and examined Arthur. "I had begun to think that you would simply never return." "I could never stay away, both for family and Diana." Arthur attempted a smile, though it felt strained. Lady Marriott exchanged a glance with Lady Hayat before following Arthur into the sitting room. "You seem to have seen much of the sun in your absence," she noted. "I suppose it must have been lovely to see the beaches, though." "Well, there was not much time for vacation," Arthur replied. He waited for his mother and cousin to sit before taking a seat across from them. "Lord Marriott is not with you." "Not today," Lady Marriott replied, sighing. "He has business to attend to, unfortunately. I did not fancy another evening with the ladies, and I have not seen you since your return." "Of course, I regret not visiting sooner," Arthur apologised. "So much has happened. It seems that once home, matters have not slowed for me at all." Lady Marriott smiled, her hand raised to her mouth in a sly gesture. "Well, I do hear there is much excitement this season, especially concerning you, Lord Hayat." "Is there?" Arthur replied, surprised. "I was unaware that I had earned such a status of celebrity." "Why, of course. It is quite dramatic for a man to disappear and reappear 5 years later, especially when he does so just as the season begins. Well, it was not my intention, and I rather think my departure was unsurprising." Lady Marriott shook her head. "You have no sense of intrigue, Lord Hayat, but no matter. Society is quite intrigued by you." It was a wonder he had not been swamped by introductions then, Arthur thought. If society was so enraptured, he would have expected them to accost him at every available opportunity. With a sudden stab of horror, Arthur realised that increased scrutiny would almost certainly mean that someone would have noticed his interest in Miss St. Clair. As the realisation came, he heard his cousin speak yet again. "So it is no wonder that society is murmuring," Lady Marriott said, "but I was shocked to hear an interesting tale concerning yourself and marriage." Lady Hayat turned to look at Lady Marriott, her gaze sharp. "What have you heard of the matter?" she demanded. "We have not breathed a word." "Well, that is the crux of the matter," Lady Marriott replied. "It was quite unusual. Apparently, the young woman poised to receive your proposal is so young and inexperienced that she has let it slip." "Proposal!" Arthur exclaimed. "And when, precisely, did word of this first appear?" "Why, as soon as you had returned," Lady Marriott explained, surprised. "I assumed that the family was aware. It is not so secret." Arthur did not have any doubts as to who had made the claim to marriage. Diana had not even known he had arrived until she'd seen him at the park. Even besides the simple fact she was of such good character that he refused to believe it was true. Miss Edge, contrarily, had been nothing but persistent since Arthur had met her. Besides Miss Edge's interest, Arthur believed she fit the description of a young, inexperienced woman who had simply made an honest mistake of leaking the news. "This is disgraceful," Arthur said shortly. "I have not planned a proposal, nor do I appreciate gossip surrounding my intentions." "So I had thought," Lady Marriott replied carefully. "But you must understand, it is simply a story that has circulated over tea and private conversation." "Well, it makes no difference," Arthur replied, surprised. "Private or public, my character is in question. I would not be able to rightfully propose to the woman I have chosen without seeming unfaithful." "Perhaps," Lady Marriott agreed. "But the culprit has not done anything precisely untoward. It might be an honest mistake." It was not, Arthur knew. It was a purposeful attempt to drive Arthur away from any other potential matches. Miss Edge had been so sly that she had silently poisoned anyone else against accepting his advances. If Diana had heard as much, it was no surprise that she had doubted Arthur's intentions. Arthur was shocked she had not turned away from him sooner if Diana had any knowledge of Miss Edge's intentions. "Well, I no longer have the patience to ignore rumour and responsibility," Arthur declared. "This is the last I will speak of it, as I cannot seem to trust that my private matters will remain so." "Do not do anything rash," Lady Hayat warned. "You will bring more scrutiny upon yourself than if you simply endured this." "I am aware," Arthur assured her. "But I have had my fill of allowing society to dictate my future. I have agency in this, and I have made my decision." Rumour mattered little to Arthur, but if Diana was affected by the drama surrounding him, Arthur would ensure he did his utmost to shield her. He would suffer no insults to Diana, even if it meant risking his reputation. Chapter 14. "You cannot hide from this forever," Miss Lily said quietly. Diana did not answer. She placed sugar into her teacup and watched it dissolve until it was completely gone. There would be a thin film at the centre of the cup, she knew, evidence that would need to be scraped away. The echo of Diana's love for Arthur was just the same. She could not completely scrape it away, despite her wish to do so. It remained just as the image of Arthur speaking to Miss Edge did. There were other ladies attending tea, but Diana had found no energy to hold polite conversation with them. She had strayed away from speaking most of the afternoon. "This will not do." Miss Lily rose from her seat and came to sit beside Diana. "I have seen you hold your head high for 5 years. This must not be the very thing that breaks you." "I do not have a choice," Diana said shortly. "We have spoken of this." Miss Lily opened her mouth to argue, but she was interrupted by the arrival of an unfamiliar face. Diana politely nodded to the woman who joined them, though her smile felt too tight on her lips. "Miss Evan," Miss Lily said politely, "I do not believe you have met Miss St. Clair." "We have been acquainted," Miss Evan replied softly. "But it was some time ago." Diana felt guilty for her lack of remembrance. Miss Evan seemed polite, if somewhat quiet and mousy. "Yes, it is nice to see you, Miss Evan." Miss Evan hesitated, as if she was unsure whether to speak. Diana assumed that Miss Evan had overheard their conversation, though she doubted if Miss Evan knew the subject of Diana's troubles. At least the conversation had ended. Diana had no wish to speak of it again, and she felt it would be best to forget everything. There was no reason to believe that she would fare any better by unburdening herself to a stranger. "I did not mean to interrupt," Miss Evans said carefully. "I only wished to speak with you, Miss St. Clair, as it seemed you might be affected by what I have to say." "Affected? In what way?" Diana inquired, uneasy. She could not hear that Arthur was entangled with yet another woman, or that he had done something equally untoward. Miss Evan nervously twisted a delicate ring on her right hand. "Well, it is only that I have been in the company of Miss Edge for some time. We have attended these functions together for months." "Have you?" Diana hoped she did not sound too surprised. She could not imagine Miss Edge having such a demure and polite friend. Though perhaps that is the way she likes it, so she might shine all the brighter. Miss Evan nodded slowly. "I do not recall how I found myself in her company." "Well, that is inconsequential," Miss Lily said briskly. "What is it that you mean by explaining this?" "She has spoken for some time of a suitor," Miss Evan explained. "Well, that is, in her telling, I would rather deem him a lover." Miss Evan blushed and averted her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the subject. Diana feared that she knew all too well where the story would lead. Miss Edge could not have been engaged or arranged to marry Arthur before his return. If it was the case, Arthur would never have reunited with Diana. Arthur would have turned Diana away as soon as he had seen her, and a public announcement would have been made to declare his engagement to Miss Edge. "Well, what more?" Miss Lily pressed. "Surely there is more you know." "Miss Edge insisted that she would marry the gentleman," Miss Evan explained. "I believe she wanted to ensure it by any means possible. Her plan was to meet him upon his return and ask her family to arrange a courtship." "Then?" Diana asked. She did not want to hear any more, but she knew it was necessary. Miss Evan shook her head. "Miss Edge insisted that she was the only woman fit for his title. She spoke endlessly of her future with the gentleman, despite my warnings about the danger." "I am not surprised," Miss Lily murmured. "It seems her downfall might be her tendency to assume too much." "Well, I believed as much," Miss Evan confessed. "But she has been in high spirits as of late, and she seemed confident that she would secure a marriage to the man." Diana closed her eyes momentarily as she remembered the last ball, and how Miss Edge had appeared to speak to Arthur as soon as he had arrived. It seemed that during every engagement Diana had attended since Arthur's return, Miss Edge had captured his attention and kept him from any other introductions. "I cannot believe that Miss Edge could be so blind," Miss Lily exclaimed, "though I should not be surprised." "That is not it," Miss Evan continued, distressed. What I meant to tell you, Miss St. Clair, was that Miss Edge notified me that she would not accompany me today because she was planning to accept a proposal." Diana froze, the teacup in her hand clinking sharply against the saucer on the table before her. She was glad she had not been standing. The china would have shattered on the ground. Somehow Diana felt distant from the news. It was a faraway thought, and though she heard it, it did not reach her. It remained a fact that floated in the air, insidious and of a dizzying odour. "Excuse us," Miss Lily said quietly. Miss Evan rose. "I am sorry," she said, her tone worried. "I believed you deserved to know." Miss Lily waited for Miss Evan to leave before she spoke again. "Are you well, Miss St. Clair? This is shocking." "No," Diana replied belatedly. The truth was beginning to resonate, and her chest constricted painfully. She sat with her mind whirling, a dizzy disbelief echoing in her mind. The world did not look the same somehow. The colours were too bright. Diana was determined not to faint. She would not let this news affect her. She had decided that whatever occurred with Arthur, she would endure it. It would not destroy her, no matter how shocking it was. "Miss St. Clair, perhaps it is not Lord Hayat that Miss Edge was speaking of," Miss Lily suggested hopefully. "It could be she has found another suitor." "No, it cannot be," Diana replied shortly. She found she had spoken too loudly and lowered her voice, waiting for the glances trained on her to slide away. "This is no coincidence. I believe Miss Edge has been in pursuit of Lord Hayat for some time." "Well, he does not love her," Miss Lily exclaimed. "Even if it were Lord Hayat that she believed was going to propose, he would never." "What else could be true?" Diana argued sharply. She shook her head and pushed her tea away, frustrated. "He has entertained her and conversed with her on several occasions. If he has requested a private audience with her, it's likely that he will propose. Could it not be equally likely that he is simply attempting to turn her away?" "Do you think he would, after all that has happened?" Miss Lily bit her lip. "Well, I do. You say that there was a promise between the two of you, and I believe it to be true. He may be meeting with Miss Edge to dissuade her from making a fool of herself." Diana badly wished for it to be true. She wanted nothing more than to learn that this was a mistake, and Arthur was truly only interested in her. However, Diana knew the pressure that Arthur faced from his family and his title. He would be expected to uphold a wildly different standard than any other man. Arthur's wife would be under similar scrutiny, and if the marriage did not benefit him or his title, it would not happen. "I've fooled myself long enough," Diana finally murmured, her voice nearly inaudible. "It was a dream, Miss Lily. It will fade just the same." "Do not say such a thing," Miss Lily pleaded, but Diana had already stood from her seat. Diana attempted a shaky smile as she bowed politely, gathering herself. "I apologize for leaving so rudely, but I fear I must speak with my family. Goodbye, Miss Lily." Diana hardly remembered her journey home. She simply found herself home again, her mind still whirling from the truth she had learned. Upon entering, Diana felt her legs were so weak she might fall on the stairs. It was all Diana could do to take herself to the sitting room, where she collapsed onto a couch, tears brimming at her eyes. She did not wish to give in to the aching sorrow she felt, but it persisted enough to make her waver. There was no hope left. Arthur would wed Miss Edge, and Diana would return to the solitude and yearning she had endured for 5 years. This time, however, there would be no hope for her, no promise of a return or a happy ending. "Diana!" Lady St. Clair rushed into the room, appearing suddenly. Her alarmed voice cut through the haze of Diana's sorrow. "Whatever is the matter with you?" "Oh, Mother," Diana sobbed. "There is nothing left. I have been a fool, and I have no one to blame for this but myself." Lady St. Clair sank onto the couch beside Diana, her hands grasping her daughter's. "Do not carry on so. Good heavens. Compose yourself and explain what it is that has reduced you so thoroughly." "What else?" Diana cried. She pressed her hands to her eyes and drew in a shaky breath. "I have made the mistake of believing in a love that was never meant to be." Lady St. Clair fell silent. Diana prepared for the same words her mother had spoken for the last 5 years. She awaited reminders that this was not a special case, that Diana was not unique in her heartbreak. Instead, Lady St. Clair quietly said, "The pain will not lessen, but you must endure it. Society will measure you by the strength of how you carry on." "Society," Diana replied bitterly. "It is that very thing that has driven us apart. Society, and another woman so desperate she was willing to do a dreadful thing." "There will always be someone who wishes to steal your happiness," Lady St. Clair said, "but you must continue. This will not be easy, but you are not alone. You may still have happiness." Diana wanted to argue. She wished she could explain to her mother how thoroughly her heart had been broken, but she could not. No one knew the depths of the love Diana had felt for Arthur. She had pressed her fingers to the flower in her diary, time and time again, imagining the way he had gazed at her at the last ball they had attended before he left. No longer. Diana would take the flower and send it into the flames of the fireplace. It would dissipate just as her hope had, and the smoke would smell as bittersweet as the memories of her true love. "I will not cry for him any longer," Diana said quietly, schooling her features. "I must continue, and I must think of my future, even if it is not what I so dearly desired." Diana stood and carefully withdrew her hands from her mother. She turned away, wiping the tears from her face, and began to make her way upstairs. She would burn the letter from Arthur as well. It would do nothing but cause her pain, and Diana already held enough of the emotion in her heart to break her entirely. Chapter 15. Arthur had received no answer from Miss St. Clair. He sat in the parlour, his mind a swirl of questions and faint hopes. There was nothing he could do about it now but wait. As he sat thinking, Arthur heard footsteps nearing the door. He looked up in time to see his father, distant surprise on the man's face at seeing Arthur. "Have you been here all morning?" "Not quite," Arthur hedged. He frowned and watched his father search for some volume in one of the bookshelves. "I thought you and Mother were meant to be visiting Lord and Lady Templeton today." "We were informed this morning that Lady Montrose is expecting her child today." "The Templetons are reasonably occupied," Lord Hayat replied. "We will visit with them and give our congratulations later, and you will attend with us." "Of course." Arthur remembered being informed in passing of Lady Montrose's marriage. She was only a year younger than Arthur, and she had been married the year before Arthur had returned. Life had continued without Arthur, but Diana waited. It was a simple fact that firmly secured Arthur's decision to pursue her. "Your mother is in the sitting room," Lord Hayat said suddenly. "Be sure to attend her if you decide to leave." "I will." Arthur stared down at the desk before him. He had not planned to leave the house, and he could find no reason to pull himself away unless he received an answer from Diana. Arthur had declined every invitation he had been given for the week, hopeful that he would receive word from Diana. Every polite refusal he had given was a gamble, but he was willing to take each one. Beside Arthur's arm was a small bundle of letters. They were knotted together with twine, the rope frayed and soft from wear. Arthur loosened the tie to examine one of the letters, the smell of salt emanating from the twine. They were love letters. He had penned them to Diana in his spare moments when he was away. Arthur had imagined presenting them to her, or perhaps keeping them hidden away until marriage. Now he wished he had sent them. Arthur sighed and stood, pushing away from the desk. He needed to clear his mind. He left the parlour and had only just reached the entryway outside the sitting room when a voice caught his attention. "Mr. Spear," Arthur said, surprised. The butler had rounded the corner, a flicker of uncertainty and grimness in his usually placid features. "Do we have a visitor?" "Young master." "This is highly unusual," Mr. Spear explained, his voice low. "I was uncertain how best to proceed." "Whatever is the matter?" Arthur asked, intrigued. "Who is it?" The lady identified herself as Miss Edge, Mr. Spear began to explain. Arthur nearly threw his hand up in surrender. He could hardly believe that Miss Edge had somehow convinced her family to supervise a visit without notice. "I will attend to her." Mr. Spear began to protest, but Arthur had already begun to walk away. When he reached the foyer, he realised his mistake. Miss Edge stood by the door, but she was unattended. Arthur froze a few feet away from her, shocked. When Miss Edge saw him, she smiled slowly. "Lord Hayat." Miss Edge bowed politely, and Arthur distantly thought that it was at least a good sign that she had not completely lost her mind. "It is so wonderful to see you." "What are you doing?" Arthur exclaimed. "Miss Edge, you have come unchaperoned." "It will hardly make a difference soon enough," Miss Edge pressed. "I was told that you would be home alone today, and I knew I should visit with you." "Have you any idea what you have done?" Arthur replied shortly. "What precisely gave you the idea to come here alone?" "Well, I know that you have only just returned," Miss Edge began, her words rushed. "And I know that propriety dictates a strict adherence to ceremony and manners. But I know you to be a true and passionate man, and I know that you love me." "This is unbelievable," Arthur muttered. He turned quickly on his heel and began to make his way toward the sitting room. "Wait," Miss Edge cried. "I have risked everything. You are free to admit what is true, and I will accept your proposal. I know that my parents have spoken of it." "This tragedy is of your making," Arthur said shortly, "and you will suffer the consequences." It was obvious that Miss Edge believed her presence would pressure Arthur to save her reputation, but he cared little, especially when Miss Edge had so thoroughly meddled in his affairs. Arthur quickly entered the sitting room. Lady Hayat looked up at his arrival, startled. "What is it?" she asked immediately. "You seem greatly disturbed." "Miss Edge has come unattended," Arthur said calmly. "She has begged to marry me." "What?" Lady Hayat exclaimed. "What on earth are you speaking of?" "She has lost her senses, or perhaps concluded she might force my hand," Arthur replied shortly. "She will not. I must answer Miss St. Clair, whose hand I am seeking in marriage." Lady Hayat stood, determination settling into her features. "Go," she said quickly. "I will see to Miss Edge, and I will speak with your father." This was the perfect opportunity. Arthur no longer had the luxury of waiting for Diana, especially with Miss Edge's reputation at stake. He would propose, and Diana would either accept or turn him away. The matter was out of Arthur's hands now. As much as he despised Miss Edge for forcing the choice, he was glad that it had happened quickly. He was prepared to face whatever answer he received. Diana. The house was quiet all morning. Diana sat on the patio at the back of the estate, watching the butterflies explore the garden that was in bloom. She had imagined walking through the garden with Arthur when he returned. It would never happen, Diana knew. The thought brought a steady ache to her chest, and she tried her best to soothe it with the lovely view before her. A commotion in the house caught Diana's attention. She turned to look at the back door, frowning uncertainly. The door suddenly flew open, and her mother and father approached. Behind them was Arthur. Diana quickly rose from her chair. She felt unsteady at the sight of Arthur and unsure of what to say. Lord Hayat. Miss St. Clair. Arthur was nearly breathless, and he stood grimly determined before Diana. I apologise, Lord and Lady St. Clair, for the intrusion. It was my intention to carry on properly, but I find myself in the uncomfortable position of refusing another family. Miss Edge, Diana realised. Lord St. Clair evaluated Arthur with a stern gaze. This is an unusual announcement, Lord Hayat. Might I ask what your purpose is? I have come to request permission to marry your daughter, Arthur said. It was a dream. It had to be, Diana thought, because Arthur would never appear in a dramatic whirlwind to pronounce his dedication to her. He simply was not that kind of man. Yet Arthur stood before her completely serious. He announced, "It has been my intention to honourably pursue the matter upon my return. However," Arthur continued, "I have found that there are many families that I must attend. It was my mistake to not realise that the season has placed myself and Miss St. Clair in an unusual position." He had refused Miss Edge and her family, Diana realised. She felt tears rush to her eyes, but she held them back through force of sheer will. Lady St. Clair exchanged a look with her husband, and Diana waited, heart pounding in her chest. "Of this matter, I am convinced," Lord St. Clair said quietly. "But it is my daughter who has suffered for this, and it will be her word that sways me." Diana stood before Arthur, aware that her word would be final. There was so much she was risking, and she knew that she might be terribly wrong about Arthur. He could have truly been dishonest, and this was only his attempt to save face. The earnestness in Arthur's gaze said otherwise. He was breathless, and his jacket askew, as if he had run to Diana without a second thought. He had risked much to appear unannounced, especially at the height of the season, when the entire town would be watching. "I'm honoured, Lord Hayat," Diana finally said. She lowered her eyes and felt her heart race as the words left her mouth. "I will prove myself worthy of this distinction." "Of worth, I have no doubt," Arthur replied softly. "You are a lady of the highest calibre, Miss St. Clair, and I have known no other like you." Lady St. Clair extended her hand to her husband, a slight rosiness dusting her cheeks. "This is highly unusual," she began carefully. "But given the circumstances, I believe it is appropriate to allow you a moment. We will be waiting within." "There is much we must speak of," Lord St. Clair agreed. "I will send word to Lord and Lady Hayat." "Thank you," Arthur replied, bowing formally. "I appreciate your understanding." Diana watched her parents withdraw toward the house. She stood with Arthur before the garden, and the brightness of the day nearly rendered the scene fantastical. Arthur turned to face Diana, a quiet hopefulness in his eyes. "I did not mean for this to happen," he said. "It was my intention to honour you properly and give you every opportunity to refuse." "I could never refuse," Diana whispered. The tears in her eyes clouded her vision, and she blinked them away, her heart swelling with joy. "So many times I nearly lost hope. Yet I believed that you were the same man that I once knew." "I am undeserving of you," Arthur said. "Do not argue the fact. I know very well how dedicated you are. I should have approached your father sooner for your hand in marriage." "That is past," Diana said. "You have done so now, and I am at peace." Arthur offered his hands. When Diana accepted them, her heart fluttered at the warmth. She never wanted to release them. "There is something I have wanted to tell you," Arthur said. "When I was away, I wrote to you. I never sent the letters for fear that I might cause you undue pain. I imagined you might have continued with your life, and I did not wish to upset you." "Letters?" Diana breathed, her pulse racing. "How I wish you had sent them." "As do I," Arthur said. But we are together now, and nothing will prevent me from proving myself to you." Diana nodded silently. There were too many words she wished to speak. There were too many things that had gone unspoken as she had awaited Arthur's return. Now that they were alone, she still could not bring herself to decide what to say first. Arthur was quiet when he next spoke. "Miss St. Clair?" "Please call me Diana," she replied. She dearly wished to hear him speak her name. "Diana," Arthur said, his tone reverential, "may I kiss you?" Diana's heart beat so strongly that she wondered if Arthur could hear it. "You may." It was a brief, warm exchange, but Diana would not have traded it for anything in the world. She felt the ghost of Arthur's lips on hers when he pulled away, his golden head haloed by the afternoon sun. This was her happy ending. Diana followed Arthur into the house, the joy she felt radiating throughout her body. Despite the trials she had faced, she would not have changed any of it. Not when she stood there with Arthur, the future before her, and brighter than ever.
Scan the QR code or click on the link in the description to read the next book in the series. Share this video with your friend or watch on of the following videos. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and hit the notification bell to not miss any new audiobooks. Thank you for watching.